My video works this week.
Yay! Welcome to class, Abby.
Thanks.
Uh-oh. You have to mute yourself.
I haven't jumped in yet.
Say, don't forget the volumes of the feet for the essential oils.
What'd you get? What brand?
What do you do?
Did I hear your voice?
Oh, you can
just
put it
like
here, just put like 4 or 5 drops.
Yeah, I was like, there's so much. I don't
on
even
the back
need
of
it.
your neck.
I can smell it.
Doesn't it just feel good?
It does.
No. When I was in Colorado in April presenting at the conference actually that Gina was at where we met, a lady who's she's a doTERRA dealer. She came and brought her whole setup for all of her doTERRA oils.
Did she really?
Yeah, I mean, she had like hundreds of little vials and everything, and she was just passing around and talking to us about all of them. And she's like, mix these two and put it on your. And I was like, woo, put that all over me. So it was
My
really
grandma's
cool.
like that. She's got a giant case of them, like huge.
My grandma was like that too.
She swears by them further. She's like, this will help you not have sinus problems. You put this one out, you don't want to get a cold or blah, blah, blah.
Oh yeah, I have the diffuser in my office, and I put On Guard in it, and so it's always running at the beginning of the school year and then through Christmas time.
Yep, I have tons of essential oils. I just live and breathe by them.
All right. Okay, is everybody here? We don't have very many of our online peeps. Where is everyone? Maybe they're in Florida and they had to evacuate.
So she just told me the actress canceled.
Yeah.
You're just now finding out?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been in like stats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I sat with, I think she's either a 4+1 or she's a graduate student, but she and I sat together for like 6 hours today and was like,
Ooh.
Where's the knife? Let's just.
No.
No, I'm kidding. But we were just like, yeah, we don't know.
Is it that bad?
It's just bad for us.
Wait, is she an RT one?
No, she's actually wilderness.
Is 4+1 only for RT, or is it for any other concentration in PR2?
In PRTM, there's only RT 4+1.
Okay, so then she's just a grad student. But we just sat there like,
My neck is
who is this?
You'll start to feel warm.
Are you in there?
Is
Are
that
you in our
class?
stats? No, Diane?
Was she can? Oh, you guys were stressing about stats.
Oh.
Not
Oh,
the
she
cancellation
couldn't
of
hear us when
ATRA.
she walked in.
That's what I was
really
interpreting
sad
you
about
reading.
that.
We're saying.
No, sorry. No,
What does Ed want to
stats.
do?
What did? Oh,
I have to figure out about my plane ticket though. Hold on.
So speaking of that, guys, I have been trying to work with Delta to get my flights refunded for ATRA, and they kindly said my wait time on the phone was more than 3 hours. That's a little robot, and so they gave me the option to get the call back. So I may get a random phone call in the middle of class, and I will take it for sure. So we'll take our break at that moment in time so that I can go deal with my flights and hopefully not have any problems there. So let's, today we've got a lot of things to do. Well, 2 topics to really talk about. One is that we did not finish last week's discussion about theory. We didn't even get to theory last week. So I'm going to try to keep us a little bit more on task today. But we're going to finish up that, and then we are going to talk about evidence-based practice. And I have to say, I love reading your guys' comments in the discussion board. You're doing fantastic. Talking with each other and answering each other's questions and putting out your ideas and putting out your own questions. Great job. Keep it up, because that's the type of stuff that I'm looking for. And I want to like comment and weigh in it, but I'm getting bogged down in it. So again, I'm going to try to bring it into class, your comments. If I don't bring up something that you really wanted to talk about, please say, hey, I had a question about this. Even if somebody commented on it and you want to talk about it more in class, we can totally do that. So I can't remember everybody's comments. I did read everybody's comments. I actually tried to print them off, but it looked really ugly because the discussions don't have a nice little print format. And so I did not bring them. So remember your stuff and bring it in. Let me really quick see who's here. Haley is here.
After
Hannah's
reading
here.
the article, I had a Fran moment though.
So asking why.
Claire, Molly.
You asked me why.
No, I was like, oh, that's why.
Well, that's good. At least
Like,
somebody connected.
I
Like,
did,
you should
so,
tell
like-
Fran
No,
that, because that is
I
what
had the same
Fran-
thing.
Gina.
I had the same thing, but reading.
My bad. one
Heather?
was, so like, I know people are really opinionated about the master's part of
Holly?
it, like being entry level, but I was like, oh, that's why, because it's
Kate?
like, we,
Abby. Okay.
I feel like, want to be like compared to OT and PT, and we want all these things,
Is Shannon here?
Unless we do
Oh
it.
no, Shannon's
Yeah, no,
So
gonna be
exactly,
absent
yeah.
today. I already knew
being
that.
like entitled and like, let's just figure out how to do it, like, because it's not gonna happen unless we do it.
Okay,
You mean like becoming a master's program? Or
we'll get to this discussion.
Yeah.
Save it. Save it. All right, online peeps, can you hear us? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, before we get there,
Okay, sorry.
I'm going to keep cutting you off. Save it for later, guys. Save it for later. All right, let's talk about theory.
What was that article called?
The one from today?
The theory one.
Oh, it was the book chapter, Portney and Watkins, chapter 1 and 2. This is out of chapter 2. So let's talk about theory really quick. What is the role of theory in research?
It's how we get our question, where we get our question from to research. Kind of where we base it off of. Maybe.
I don't know that you base it off it, but they kind of hold hands together a little bit, your research question and your theory.
Okay.
We'll uncover that a little bit more.
Is it more like an educational foundation?
It is a foundation, and it could be educational, yes. Any other thoughts about the role of theory in research?
Kind of the why and how we do it.
The why and how. That's really good. Why we do what we do, and in some instances, how we do what we do. But yeah, really good. And it provides the foundation. So interestingly, theory can also provide the foundation for practice. Dun, dun, dun. Did I just blow your mind?
Yeah.
I'll say it again. Theory can provide the foundation for practice. Okay, we'll go there later. Okay, so I don't want to spend forever and ever on this theory because I feel like the later conversation about evidence-based practice is going to be lively, and so I'd rather spend more of our class time there than on this. So I'm just kind of going to float through this. But theory organizes and gives meaning to complex facts and observations. Okay, so I think of this sometimes as a roadmap, right? If you want to go somewhere, you put in a destination in Google Maps. That's not how we used to do it, but you'd get out a map and you'd say point A, point B, and follow this process to get there. Hang on a second, let me figure out how to turn my emails off so we don't keep getting all those notifications. Apologize.
Oh, they said theories help validate practice.
They do help validate practice. They provide explanations for findings within a context. So we get some information out of a study or whatever, and as long as we have had this foundational roadmap, then we can kind of understand potentially what those findings mean. They help prevent reinventing of the wheel. So I've got to come up with a way to do this. So there's probably some theory that explains how to do that already, or how to think a certain way about that already. So if you can find it, then you don't have to come up with it on your own. Great. Why reinvent the wheel? It specifies relationships between concepts, definitions, propositions. All of this can be interrelated, and a theory can help clarify where the relationships are. And then it gives you a systematic way to view something. So instead of just thinking, well, I just think that it's like this for no rhyme or reason why you think it that way, a theory says this is why we think about this in this way. So it's a systematic way of thinking. So can you guys think of any theories that we use in rec therapy?
Self-determination theory.
Okay. Which is in one sentence or less.
Motivation.
Okay.
Okay, so
A loose definition.
yeah.
Talks about motivation. Make sure you talk loud too, because people can't hear you on the recording. I learned that this week.
So I just thought it was really applicable to, like, if you're working in behavioral health, the self-determination theory.
Okay.
Because it works with the, I don't even know how many levels of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and how to get patients involved in treatment when it's an acute, well, I was working on an acute inpatient psych unit, so they didn't want to be there. They didn't ask to be there. Most of the time the police brought them there against their will. And so how do you get them involved in treatment? So.
Okay, so self-determination theory told you how to do your job?
It gave me an idea of how to gauge them in their level of motivation and where to go from there. Sounded really confident.
Mm.
So motivation is something distinct from self-determination. They're related,
Right.
but it's its own thing. But so what are the 3 elements to self-determination? Have you learned this anywhere yet? Or you, huh?
Can we cheat?
If you want to.
I have
This is
learned
not
it,
in the reading anywhere, so
know.
I expect the higher level students to know this information though.
but we did learn this in foundations.
Uh-huh.
Okay, hold on.
You probably learned it somewhere. There's 3 components or concepts within the theory of self-determination.
Like self?
Mm-mm.
No, okay. No.
I should probably know since I brought it up.
This isn't necessarily specific to RT either, but this is a good example of how,
Autonomy, competence, and
yes,
relatedness.
relatedness. Okay, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. If you can impact somebody's autonomy so they have freedom to choose and what they're going to do, right? That's what autonomy means. They have freedom of choice. If you can impact their competence, so you give them skill, that they feel able to do whatever it is that they're being asked to do. And if you impact their levels of relatedness, so they can relate to somebody who's in a similar situation. So this could be impacting, growing a social circle or whatever. But if you can increase all 3 of those areas, impact all 3 of those areas, you're impacting somebody's self-determination. So already knowing that there's these 3 components and that if I do all of this, I'll impact somebody's self-determination, which makes them better able to function in their environment, in their life, in a long-term care center or an acute psych is what you said, acute psych. Then they have more control over their lives. So I don't know that it's so much about motivation. I mean, it's related, but
No, you're
motivation
right. I
and
was
control.
using motivation wrong. So for them in that setting, they felt like they had lost all sense of control, and to some extent they had. I
Mhm.
mean, just even their willingness to walk
Absolutely.
through the door.
When you're admitted, it's taken away from you.
Yeah.
So how do you increase that in a very, like a lockdown situation?
Work on it.
There are other ways, right? But they can choose their leisure activities. They can choose how they respond to the different facets of their treatment, right? Sometimes people don't think explicitly about that they have choice. Well, I'm in a lockdown facility. How could I have any choice over anything? I have to take my meds. Somebody holds me down while I take my meds, whatever.
Mhm.
Okay, so all they see is all the instances of where choice has been taken away. So as a rec therapist, we could come in and help show them all the elements where they do have choice. We could, impact the other 2 ways, autonomy, competence, give them some skill on something, likely leisure related, right? It's all coming together, right? So already we have certain things that we would do with them if we were trying to impact their self-determination. We have to know that that's what we're trying to impact, self-determination, in order to go down these 3 roads of the 3 components of self-determination, right? If we didn't know that's what we wanted to impact, then we wouldn't necessarily do these particular things. So again, a theory is like a roadmap for practice and research. If I wanted to measure self-determination, somebody's change in self-determination while they're in an inpatient psych, I would use an instrument to measure it, right? But then I would have some intervention aimed at impacting their self-determination. So then it would likely impact their autonomy, competence, and relatedness, some element of my intervention, give them some choice, give them some skill, and give them some friends. Really simplistic, right? Okay, but do that for 8 weeks and then measure again and see how much has changed. Theory influencing practice. How many of you guys as practitioners have used theory in your practice? Okay, Jake, I see you raising your hand. Explain.
All right. So I guess I took that theories class this past spring,
Mhm.
and it definitely opened my mind to things that I do that are like evidence-based and things that are like based on theories, to help with my individuals where I work. And I guess getting those theories to evidence base is.
This is Delta. I'm really sorry. Delta is calling me right now. Can we take a break, guys? I apologize.
I was like, that's kind of important.
I had a feeling it's gonna be like at the beginning.
Yeah. It's an awkward 20-minute break. Wow. About time we had the break.
Right in the middle of my speech.
What?
You what?
I said it was right in the middle of my speech.
Oh, sorry.
Bummer.
This will give you more time to think about it.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
meditate on
What?
My neck is still so tingly. Yeah.
Peppermint oil can do that.
Like for a long
I
time.
mean, I don't know how long.
Yeah,
Are you allergic to anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll watch you.
Does any
No worries, I got
oil
the Benadryl.
help with just like colds?
Probably.
I have like a terrible
I can text my grandma.
grandma.
I'll
for
really
rescue.
will.
Do it, yeah.
So I know that peppermint oil helps with like sinuses because of the
It's helping
spirit.
sinuses. Yeah.
Spirit.
I just started
It's just
PT
the
for my
cold.
neck, so I was like, maybe I should start like, this peppermint oil.
So I don't know.
My neck just feels really cold
Texture.
right now.
So I know like more about like mood enhancement,
did you
like
put on
lemon.
No, I
Citrus
didn't do it.
helps
Well, it says
release
lavender
dopamine, so it's a natural
calming.
antidepressant. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Really
she just
feel
amazing.
Yeah.
Hmm?
When I would tell the patients like, all right, so we're going to the
Really?
Yeah,
it's your
apparently not.
little
Hey.
antidepressant.
You guys, if you use the doTERRA oils,
Oh,
Yeah. That's what we're using.
doTERRA oils, and you have allergies, they should not affect you because they're the most pure oils that you can use. And like I'm allergic to cinnamon, but if I use the cinnamon doTERRA, it's because it's the pure cinnamon.
That
And
makes
it's
sense.
not the bark. I mean, it's from the bark of the tree and not the crap that you buy in the grocery store. Then you shouldn't have any kind of allergic reactions to it. So,
So even if you're allergic to cinnamon, but you use cinnamon, you're not allergic to
the
cinnamon?
doTERRA, you're not, because it's
Would more pure? Would you be more allergic?
If it's
no,
more pure,
no, it's pure. It takes all of those impurities out of it. So if you're allergic to something, it doesn't react to you the same way. Do you see what I'm saying?
If you're like allergic to the false cinnamon, but you're never exposed to it.
And the cinnamon you buy in the store is not the cinnamon that you get from like
That's true.
Hashtags.
But anyways, yeah, I'm really into doTERRA and all the essential oils and all the uses and everything. So.
Did you go to ATRA last year and hear the chick from Temple talk about aromatherapy?
No, I've been using aromatherapy for years though, and I actually get doctor's orders at my facility to use it
Yeah,
on my.
That's what she was talking about. She like broke it down for RTs and populations, and she was like, all right, if you're behavioral health, you go here. If you're elderly, whatever, you go here. And she like categorized the most effective and efficient oils for that population. It was really neat.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm doing my research project on. So
It is, but I'm like so focused.
Your face is so focused. I'm not.
It is like,
It does feel good.
it's like a hot and cold at the same
yeah,
time.
it's like the what's that stuff you put on shins? It's bio.
Biofreeze?
Biofreeze.
Everyone seems to love
I have
biofreeze.
some in my
Yes,
car.
you should.
Do you really?
Yeah, I get really bad migraines, so that's what they give
Do
me.
you
That
use
helps?
Yeah, I like put it here and on my neck, and it
which one do you use? Do you
Well,
use
they-
the blue or
like,
frankincense?
of it at the Headache Wellness Center.
I think she thinks you're talking about essential oil.
Oh, I use Biofreeze.
doTERRA.
Basically the same.
It's a special order. You can't get it anywhere.
Yeah, you can use frankincense or deep blue. I use that on my resin.
It's like higher quality. Or apparently the highest.
Oh, natural cinnamon.
Are we doing number twos tomorrow?
I think
We didn't
number
even finish
one.
number
We're still on
ones yesterday.
Yeah,
What?
number ones.
Oh no, we're still on number one.
We'll be on number one for the rest of the unit.
I haven't read 2 or 3 yet.
So you're not going to.
Oh, I
No,
haven't read
don't.
two or
Not
three.
until
Probably
it's time.
Probably not.
Well, you shouldn't because I forget.
Well,
We discussed a poem for
Yeah.
45 minutes that wasn't even on the reading.
I read it all because it's
Oh, you're so proud.
You
Oh,
read
I
them.
didn't. I was like, fuck that.
Wait, you read all 3 units? No, you just read everything in Unit 1. I did that the first week, and then I couldn't talk about anything because I didn't remember.
I just said the hashtags.
Yeah, yeah, that's
The what?
exactly what it is. So one of the hashtag and said,
Oh.
here's what we're talking about. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll read that.
I just
You
feel
don't
like we go
remember
off on
everything about
tangents.
your
It's not even on the syllabus. Oh, my grandma.
No, I need to print out a new syllabus.
So
Here, I'll show
Wait,
you.
I thought 1, 2,
Here we
3
go.
was Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3.
he
No, he
prioritized.
named it, or like he prioritized
Within the
it.
units, he relabeled 1, 2, 3.
Actually,
Okay, I need to print off a new one.
You might need a
I've like
picture.
highlighted what I read, so
So you
that's
guys,
all one.
so you guys aren't reading the number 2 readings.
No.
Okay, it's
No,
like being
In Unit 1.
Right.
Because
That's not happening.
No.
So
Yeah, when I saw like the read all of this, I texted Louise and I was like, does he
All
genuinely
this
like
is
read
Unit
all
one.
of it? And she was like,
Or
yeah,
like
yes. And I was like,
just
I'm not
one,
doing
like
this.
Unit
Just
1,
finished
number
with
1. So it has a 1 next to it.
Okay.
I
And then
would've
the 2
been so
is the other
pissed.
stuff, and
Okay.
then the 3 is
Yeah.
this.
Oh, nice.
I watched
Okay.
a few videos. So I was like,
That's
Okay.
And then there's 2.
Yeah.
saying the same
Same
thing.
thing.
Like,
Like,
one
what
of
is
the
philosophy? What is philosophy? What is
like
philosophy? It's
only
what
ones
is
that I
it?
read from like front to back, cover to cover, through and through. He freaking took off, so nobody knew that I was talking about Kennedy's
And then
speech.
last class,
Like,
I feel like I got more
I don't think I
class and you
saw that
class
ever,
because,
but
like,
I
he
feel like
gave us,
he's
like,
changed
a
it so
handout,
much.
They-
and we had to like talk about it. But like most classes, just like why?
Yeah.
I literally can't remember anything from the text. I only remember from the videos. Like that's what I was
I
trying
know,
to do.
right?
because there's so much throughout the text.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to remember a video.
And I tried
Yeah.
to take notes on the text, and I was like, they're all the same.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
they
know
all,
how to
well,
take
that's
notes
the
in
thing is
class.
they all say basically the same
Yeah,
thing.
so it's like, how am I supposed to read this over and over?
Yeah.
Like that one girl sits like, well, she sat yesterday. She sat in the door, but she's probably read everything. From
Oh, the one Lauren. She's like.
Wait, which one?
super-
Brunette.
Yeah.
Yes.
She
Yeah,
was
yeah.
sitting
The
on
one
the
who
other side,
talks
and
all
now
the time.
she's sitting on our side.
Hippos?
No,
No,
you like
you're
hippos.
hippos.
That's me.
You're the hippo girl.
No,
It's
something
okay.
polar bears.
I love polar bears. Isn't she studying polar bears?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
Really?
wish I studied
I think
those.
that's cool.
That's cool.
I think that's what she said.
I do love polar bears.
Just
Like
a
with
really
the ice
good place to
caps
come to
and-
study polar bears.
I think they like take trips.
Probably. Yeah, Jess the second, or she's a PhD student, what am I saying? She's in Alaska right now. Collecting data.
Yeah, like
Whoa.
half of them just like, I'm leaving
How
tomorrow.
can you do
I'm
that? Like,
She's staying
Dude,
with the National
Ryan
Wildlife
and Anna
Refuge.
are spending all next semester traveling, like just like national parks collecting data. Ryan and Anna.
And then that
Did I
other
tell
guy,
you-
like,
did I
has
show you
hair
my-
like this. Like, how
And
do
Ryan
he,
said I was with her. They're like
so he doesn't study?
He's a
research
soccer player.
partners or something,
He's
and
on
they're
the
literally
team.
gonna be gone all
But
next
like, is he
semester traveling.
studying?
Yeah.
I'm so
Doing-
jealous.
So how does
Right.
that work?
here, that's my hippo
Yeah,
dog.
Right?
She has
There's
Olaf in
another
her mouth.
cartoon in Africa,
Maggie.
like saving gorillas right now. Like he's just been
She
in
looks like a
Africa for
hippo
few
when she
years.
does things.
She's adorable.
I would
Yeah.
Like a baby.
Yeah,
Louise
that's
wants
it.
to do a
So how
tiger
does that work?
conservation
Like, does
thing.
he just listen to
Oh, yeah,
it?
we got that.
Well,
He's
he's
been
gonna
on-
try. I mean, he's gonna be
She's
very
the one like
fun.
doing that whole social media thing with the other
Oh, wow.
3 tiger schools.
All
Like
our
that thing
LSU.
that was at the beginning.
Oh,
He's like
okay.
saving tigers. He's doing the social media for that. You know what I'm doing? Not that much.
Research with pregnant ladies.
Yeah, pregnant lady research. It's not even pregnant lady research, it's just lady research.
It's really cool.
I'm not. I seriously, like, yesterday, I think I only had 1 class, but I wook up and, like, I had a fever.
That was
And
me
then halfway
Monday.
through the day, I got, like, super sweaty and clammy, and I was just washing the dishes, and I was like, I have to lay down. And I was just, like, saying things that didn't make sense.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I was
Man,
like,
that's been going
my
around.
neck
No,
is
that's
killing
Sunday.
me. Like my neck.
I
My
did
mom said
that
there's a
Monday.
lymph. My mom's a nurse. She said there's a lymph node back here, and it's like that particular spot
Yeah.
is so painful right now. And Thomas is terrified of flu, so he won't touch me.
You must have like a
Aw.
bacterial infection.
I think so. I haven't been sick in like a year though. I'm very upset about it.
Well, you just came to
yeah, new place.
Yeah, my friend-
Stupid. Well, this girl coughed on
I've
me.
walked through the flu for like
She walked
7
by
years
me
in
and
the
went
hospital, and I came
all
here on
over
Monday.
me. I was like,
like-
and then 2 seconds later, a dude
I'm
sneezed on me. Literally, like, in like 2 seconds of each other. Girl coughed on me, and then a dude sneezed on me. And I was like, okay, and I was like, I better not get sick. And like 12 hours later, I wake up and I'm like,
My friends were like passing around
Jerks.
the stomach flu.
Oh, screw that.
A week, like the first week here, and I was like, get away from me.
I had a stomach flu before school started, so it's
Mine's not.
Mm-mm.
I used
I'm
to
not
do
even gonna
that,
tell
like,
you
every
guys the
6
last time I had
months
the
we
stomach
would
flu.
go.
It's been like longer than.
Yeah.
I
think I was
haven't had
I used to get it like every
Junior
6
in high
months
school.
for like it was like clockwork, like on the dot, every like January and July or something. It'd be stomach.
That's how it was
and
for
I'd,
me, like,
throw up
really
so
bad
bad, and then it'd be gone. And it was like for years, and then it stopped a few years ago.
How old were you when you had yours out?
Like at sophomore year of college, I woke up at 6 a.m. and was
it was terrible.
I had mine out at 19, and I did not do well. Like the 3-year-old that was in surgery an hour before me was in daycare, and my mom was like,
didn't work.
"Get up!" And I was like,
My aunt's a doctor.
Oh
and I
my
called
God.
her, I was like, what can I
24
do?
is horrible.
I can't keep
And
it
then when I went
back.
back to work, my boss said,
Seriously do it. I was like, okay.
my
And
boss,
like for like 30 minutes,
let me-
I was
that's what
okay.
we
And I was like, no.
so he
And
let me
yeah,
do 8 stuff.
didn't work. It was
Nice.
terrible.
He let me do 4 8s.
I used to get strep throat
Yeah.
like twice a year when I was in elementary school and middle school.
Nice.
Like,
I
that's
was
the
able
only
to
sickness
manipulate
I ever
my
got. I never got
schedule,
strep,
so
but never had the flu.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I've had the flu before.
But
strategize with
I used to get it every year twice, and
So,
then I didn't get it for like a
it was
couple years, and then my
Yeah.
freshman year of college, I
I
got it.
did that so
Mhm.
much.
They
Because I
told me
did 4
got it all the
attempts
time when I was
eventually
little, and they
the
said
last year I was there.
carrier for it.
And
then
but
they
the 2
said
years
that if
before that, I
I
didn't take a vacation
Get
at
it
all
one more
because
time,
I was
they're gonna
saving
take out my
PTO for
tonsils, and then I never got it again.
like
Wait.
IVF.
No.
That's what they told
So
me too.
I
in
had
middle school.
so
I got it
much
'cause I had it
time. They
3
had to
times
pay
year
me
one
a
time, and
month
then you're gonna
after
have to
my
get it
end
taken out.
date.
But after that, I never had it again.
Yeah, I had that amount of PTO.
Wow.
And if they
Yeah,
would have
it's
paid it
so
to me in one
painful.
lump sum, it would have been taxed harder. So they were nice and they gradually did it for like a month later.
I don't think
No.
I'm safe from that.
Let's see.
I don't think a lot of places would have done.
I'm trying to use
They
self-determination
only
theory.
like in North
Because I
Carolina,
actually
I know they
applies
can
to,
only
like,
like
wow,
give you
do my
like
research.
so many hours.
It's like
Oh
motivation.
no, I accumulated because I didn't take a
Advocate
vacation for
for
2
yourself.
years.
So this
Yeah.
would actually be really
They like
good.
at the end of the year,
only thing
they're
I'm
like,
finding
if
with
you don't
women
take so
and
much, like,
self-determination
you only
theory
get
is
6
female
months full
bodybuilding.
Like now, I wouldn't do that. Like I don't care. But
like
and
take a
breast.
vacation.
Breastfeeding
even like our
motivation
first,
and
That's
self-determination
rule.
theory.
because we did
Yeah,
the whole
that's a
procedure
self-
twice.
yeah.
So like our first round, like we
Why do
tried to
women
schedule
engage
out,
in
and it
cat
just became
talk?
really stressful for everybody involved because it was like
Sounds like a professional. Mark.
appointment and then wait, and then appointment, then wait to see if we had to go to the next appointment.
No, it's
At the end, they were just like, all right, take 2 weeks off.
Facebook sometimes has like
Like
actual,
for whatever you're doing,
articles
just
on there.
take 2 weeks off. We'll,
Yeah.
we'll recap it 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, I'll take 2 weeks off.
This
It was nice.
geriatric dementia outdoor activities. This may be a
When
dumb
I-
question.
Yeah.
Do
Well, I
you
only
just
went to
smell essential
A
oil?
year and 2
You
months.
just smell
Because
it?
then I came here.
What do you mean?
Like
But-
you don't eat it,
We start out
or like
No,
you
you
would-
put it on yourself.
you put it on your
Put it
skin
on yourself
Right.
and smell it.
and
So we
but
started
You don't ever
point-
like put it in tea or
0.5 or 0.6, and then
But
after
there
5
is
years you
some,
get 0.8.
There's like
So I bet you had like
That's wrong.
nothing.
there's like herbal tea that has
See, yeah.
like,
I work for a
like,
private
stuff
for-profit
in them, but
hospital.
it's like
That's what I
not
do.
an oil, it's an herb.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See,
yeah,
I have
that's
we have a
That's what I drink. Is
Yeah, that's what
a
we
bunch
do.
of different kinds of tea.
yeah, we have a
basically,
tea
like,
basket.
as soon as I
I'm
got
so
vacation, I
excited.
have
I love
Yeah.
my teas.
Mhm. My
Oh.
replacement does that.
The
And she like
most- I went
manipulates
to
the
a
schedule
Earth
because I
Fair,
still have her
and
on
I've been looking for this
410s.
kind of
So she'll
tea
work like
for so long. but
8
it's
days
tough
in a
to
row,
have.
and she'll be off for like
And
a
it
week.
just, yeah, it's like an antidepressant
All
in
my
a
that
tea.
manipulation.
Yeah. But I was like, Mom was like, what? My tea is here.
What is
Um,
it? Any
It's called
antidepressant?
cup of happy. It's like
Oh.
the herbs are supposed to, reduce your depression or anxiety or whatever. It's really cool. I like
So
it.
one of the doctors that I worked with was amazing. He did both Eastern and Western medicine, and he would take patients' blood, like a lab draw, and if you had a combination of both low vitamin B and
Mm.
vitamin D, you were more prone for depression symptoms. So
Yeah.
he would boost them with the vitamins first before he put them on an
That's so
antidepressant.
smart.
And we didn't work with them for very long. So irregardless if we had them for 3 to 6 days, an antidepressant isn't going to get to its therapeutic level within the system for that long. For us to monitor it, they have to monitor it outpatient.
It's
So
like
he would
6
do
weeks,
it.
right?
Yeah, it's like 6 to 8 weeks for it to get to the therapeutic level. So he would do the vitamins first, and if they felt better after a week or three to 8 days, whatever, then
I like that
he
so
would
much
treat
better.
it that way.
I feel like that's much
His
more.
name was Dr. Wu. He was the greatest.
That is
Aw.
great. I think that's better for your body
It absolutely.
instead of all those daggum chemicals.
Ooh, no, it's not cup of happy. It's cup of calm.
Cup of
calm.
That's what it is. I just
thought.
thought of the mug that I have a mug that says cup of happy. And I was like, that's not what it's called. Cup of calm. That's what it is.
There's this tea called Bengal Spice. This,
Ooh,
yeah.
so good.
Have you had it?
I think I have.
Yeah, it
There's
has
a
a-
couple of different brands.
It has a Bengal tiger on the box. The one I get. It's like Celestial. That's the brand.
Oh, yeah, I love Celestial.
It's literally like a blanket and like a bubble bath and a candle mixed into a tea.
Yeah, it's like cinnamon, orangey.
That's pretty fancy.
Oh,
I
I
love
love
baths.
spicy teas. Like
I love
good.
chai.
Chai is my favorite.
I
have
like the
chai every
okra
morning.
chai better.
Yes,
Have you
do
tried
it.
the okra chai at Starbucks?
I try not to get Starbucks too much because I think I worked at like a coffee shop
Oh,
at
yeah.
Western. And I worked at the Point,
Oh, did you?
so I'm so like biased against Starbucks. I love that, but it's so expensive.
I just
It
like
is.
their chai because it's
But I
a
do-
little less spicy. It has more cinnamon instead of spice.
Yeah, I like the. We had the brand, like the regular brand. You get it like
This one's traditional medicinal.
at Walmart and other places.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what it's even called. I just like I'm so used to getting the box. Like they come from
Is
like
that
a
like
powder
the name
and
of
a
this cup of
jug.
calm?
Oh,
The
nice.
traditional
What's it called?
medicinals is cup of calm.
I don't know.
I'm gonna
Have
think
you seen
of
the
it.
one that's like smooth?
But I know how to make
All
it
those,
like
that's
a
for
chai
constipation.
latte like should. So like
Yeah.
I
They have
just-
one that's
I'm so used to making it in my
PMS
house.
tea.
Yes,
That would be
It's
nice.
so easy. All you do is like
It's milk and tea, right?
yeah. So you like you can
literally
use milk
PMS
or you
tea.
can
It's
use
by
water, but all you do is
traditional
heat it. Like you put the powder in.
They
And
use
then,
like
like,
solar
like,
grocery.
yeah,
make sure you have hot
I
water.
buy that
for
on
it.
Target.
Yeah.
Genuine tea from there, and my.
I like that.
And then you don't have to pay
I
$5
have like
for it. 'cause, like
Oh yeah,
chai
chocolate.
is
That's
really
what I'm
expensive.
living.
'Cause I mean, like the
They might
the
not
like
have that
little
kind of
container is
chemical.
$4,
They have
and
the
that makes
brand.
probably like
Yeah, see, the
Yeah,
PMS
but, like,
one
then there's
and the
10
cup of calm. Cup of calm, the only place
Yeah.
I found that particular one was at Earth Fair, and I really hate Earth Fair. It's $1 million. I went in there once, found that tea, and that's all
It's
I
like
bought. I was
a
PMS
grocery
tea.
store. They probably have one.
Yeah.
What's your women's health?
Well,
What
this
does
is
that
really
do?
just-
Oh,
I
it's
have no
organ.
idea.
No.
I just, yeah, let's see.
You want?
Do you think everyone can hear?
Yeah.
Supports good PMS, easing
I
Sorry,
think that she
Jake.
got locked out. I don't know.
There's only one guy. Is it
Oh,
still
it's-
recording?
I think so, but they can't. Oh, it's Tazo. I think it's Tazo and organ chai. We use both.
Okay.
That this one.
Yay!
They rebooked me. They did everything.
Oh, when
Awesome
you're
stuff.
going?
Oh, wait.
Well, because I have another conference in
Oh.
Orlando in November, and so rather than
Nice.
cancel my flights, they just rebooked me on
Your
a new
family's
set of
gonna go
flights.
too?
Probably not.
Are they bummed?
Yeah, but I don't think they even really like the kids didn't even really realize what's going on. So
Really, it was like all over the fridge.
Is Marie?
I know, but we haven't told them we're not going yet.
Oh,
No.
that part.
Yeah, so they don't know. Is Marika upset?
We should
Oh.
have like a.
We should do something for her.
Is she going
It'll
to
Are they
still
gonna
be-
have
She can have
another
her
ceremony
speech
type
here.
thing?
They're working things out.
She can have her speech and we could come. We can do the chant.
Who's the one?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, we're gonna
Whatever.
do that.
her does.
Okay, so how do we get everybody? How do we get everybody back? Is this everyone?
I think they just have to do it themselves. See,
They're probably sitting here listening to us this
I know.
whole time. Chai too.
we had a discussion about tea.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right, guys. I apologize for having to bail out on that, but that was very important that I fix my flights. So, no, I apologize. We're back. Jake, I want to let you pick up where you were talking about how you used theory in your practice.
Yeah, I don't even remember where I left off.
Okay.
But pretty much, like, theory is like the basis of where we get our ideas from to proceed with evidence-based research for our practice. So, like holistic theory, there's locus of control, all these different things that we use in our practices evolve into evidence-based research at some point.
Okay. Yes to all of that. I apologize for the distraction and and having to leave and having you lose your thoughts. Hopefully they'll
Yes,
come back. We'll get it back. Okay, so we were talking about examples of how theories are useful to us in both research and practice. Theories, we don't ever really prove theories to be right or wrong. So we never prove anything with our research. We say that things are, where's my notes here? We can only demonstrate that a theory's premise can hold or not hold. So it's not proof of anything. So don't ever write "this proves that" in your writing. Let's see some other thoughts about theory. Oh, the parts of theories. Okay, we've got concepts, right? So this is really reminders from last week's reading, so I'm just going to skim through it. These are like the building blocks. Concepts are like the abstract thoughts. They're not always things that are easily measurable, but they're still something that we recognize as part of kind of behavior or something. We give them numerical values so that we can measure them, but they inherently don't have numerical value. So this is like self-esteem. Is there a number really that I have high or low self-esteem that you could inherently have a number associated with that? No, but we assign it a number so that we can measure it. Okay, so those are concepts. Concepts are not really, that are not observable are called constructs. They can't be measured directly. So this is like intelligence. You can't really see intelligence, right? So we come up with a way to measure it. By some proxy, right? So what's the proxy measure for intelligence? IQ or GPA, achievement, all of that can kind of be used as a measure of intelligence because it's not inherently observable, okay? So we have concepts and constructs, two different things. One's more easily observed than the other. Propositions, these are statements about relationships between those concepts and constructs. You can have hierarchical propositions, so it has order to it. So first you have to have this, then this, then this. Now there's no order to the concepts in self-determination theory. Autonomy is not necessarily more important than competence, which is not necessarily more important than relatedness. They're all kind of on an even playing field. So, but you guys remember, here's like psychology rearing its ugly head, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That has order to it, right? What's the basic level of the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy?
The base is your food and water and shelter. I forget the name.
Yeah, I can't remember the actual name, but yes, food, water, shelter, safety, that's the base. What's the very top, at the top of the triangle? Self-actualization, exactly, okay. So can we ever see self-actualization? No, that's a construct. That's right, okay. Temporal propositions, these are, they order the concepts in time. So for example, when we think about motor skills, they progress with age, and so it orders the way that we think about things, but it orders it by age. There are quantitative propositions, so this is frequency or durations of behaviors, so reps and endurance, amount of leisure and well-being. So we've got concepts, constructs, propositions, and then models. So not every theory has a model, but some theories do have a model, and a model is usually a visual representation of all of these relationships together. So it's an analogy for the real phenomenon. So it leaves out a lot of the details, and it's meant to just be an overarching way to look at things. So it doesn't, yeah, I guess the point there is that it just doesn't include the details for every single situation. So I'll give an example. I'm going to use the little whiteboard. And for those of you who had stats with me over the summer, this will seem familiar to you. All right, here's our whiteboard. I'm going to draw a model of family leisure. Where's my drawer? A pencil. That's what I want. I'll make sure that I use a color that Jake can see. unless you're wearing your glasses.
What colors
Okay.
can we see?
Dark colors, right, Jake? Not red. Like one time I was doing red and pink.
Yeah, red. I'm red or green colorblind.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to type it in really quick. This is called the core and balance model of family leisure functioning. All right, so it even says model in the name of it there. Pretty straightforward, right? So this is going to give us a way of thinking about family leisure. I mean, how do you guys think about family leisure? If you were to explain and describe the types of family leisure, how would you describe it?
Core and balance.
If you already know core and balance, don't say it. Just so that we have a little bit of discussion here.
Okay.
Formal and informal.
Yeah, like you said, with a game night versus like, hey, let's play cards at dinner.
Okay, so something structured or unstructured, maybe formal or informal.
Yeah.
Okay, organized or not organized.
It'd be like you do it all the time or not. You do it all the time or not all the time.
Okay, so something that happens frequently is part of your routine. Things that don't happen as part of your routine. Yes. Okay, so what are some other ways to think about types of family leisure? Different types.
Like everyday or like big events.
Everyday,
Like
everyday
events.
things, part of your routine, or
Family
big things that
vacation.
don't happen often. Okay, like Disneyland in Orlando
That doesn't happen.
that gets canceled because of a hurricane. Anyways,
Is
Yeah.
it like expensive or not expensive?
okay, cost could help determine different types of family leisure. Yeah, you guys are getting at a lot of different kind of characteristics about family leisure. So if you were to paint a picture of what family leisure looks like based on everything you would just say, how would you have like a one sentence description of that? It'd be really difficult, right? Or maybe 2 sentences, but it would be really difficult. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you same question, but with a different concept, family functioning. What is family functioning? How would you explain what family functioning is?
It's participating in activities together as a family.
Okay, not specific to leisure though, just family functioning very broadly. But I guess that's part of it, is doing things together.
When you understand one another enough to cooperate.
Understanding, cooperation,
Communication.
communication, interactions. Yeah, so you guys are describing a lot of characteristics of family functioning. So again, if we're trying to understand how family leisure and family functioning impact each other, based on our brief description of the two concepts right now, do we have a good understanding maybe? Probably not, because there's not a whole lot of direction in that. Well, what kind of family leisure influences family functioning? Okay, so let's talk about a model here really quick. So there's this model, the core and balance model of family leisure functioning that, I want to draw, there it is. That explains how to think about this. So we have family leisure. I'm doing this on my trackpad, guys, so it looks not pretty. Bear with me. That's a dotted line. We have core activities. These are your low-cost, everyday, home-based, consistent tradition, routines, all of that type of activities. So things like family dinners, baking together, reading books together. What are all the things you do in your home with your family, or you did when you were growing up? Raking up the leaves in the fall and playing in them, in your yard, jumping on a trampoline, shooting hoops in the driveway. All that stuff that is really easy to do, doesn't take a whole lot of planning, right? So these are some of the things that you guys said as we were just like briefly talking about describing family leisure: low cost, easy to plan, happens all the time without a lot of effort. That is a core family leisure activity, type of activity, okay? The other distinction is balance, core and balance. So balance leisure or balanced family leisure activities are basically the opposite of core They take more time to plan, more resources, more effort. They don't happen all of the time because they take all that time to plan. Some of that includes money to plan, so you have to save up for that. They are generally not home-based activities. They happen in your local community and out in your farther away community. So these could be things like family vacation, or going out to dinner instead of eating at home, or camping, outdoor adventure type of activities, family vacations to Wally World. Like to use National Lampoons as great examples of family leisure gone wrong, right? Okay, so now we have a little bit more of a clear conceptualization of what family leisure looks like, right? This is a dotted line here because for some people, a core activity, one core activity or one type of activity can be core for somebody and balance for somebody else. For example, I live on Lake Hartwell. We have a kayak. So water activities in the summer, water activities are core. We do them all the time because I can just throw the kayak or the paddleboard in the truck and drive 1 mile to the little put-in, and we go paddleboarding a couple of times a week. Now, if you don't live on the lake and you don't have a paddleboard or a kayak or whatever, that's probably not a core activity. You don't do it frequently. It takes a lot of effort to do that. So it doesn't really meet those characteristics of a core activity, right? So that's why that dotted line is there. It's a little bit different for everybody. But in general, the characteristics of core are pretty solid, and the characteristics of balance are pretty solid. Now, the activities can switch which category dependent on a lot of things. All right, family functioning. Family functioning. This is not a dotted line. There's not a whole lot of flexibility between these two. Family functioning is made up of cohesion and adaptability. So cohesion is how well your family works together as a unit. Has elements, develops elements of bonding and relationships and interactions, et cetera, kind of all the things that you guys said. Adaptability is how flexible your family is. So kind of think about all the punches of life that you get as a family and how well you're able to kind of roll with the punches type of a thing. So that would be adaptability. Both of those together make up family functioning. So the core and balance model says that family leisure activities help develop cohesion. Balance activities, specifically balance, help develop adaptability. So core develops cohesion, balance develops adaptability. That's a model. So if I want to measure family leisure, I assume that there's some instrument to measure that. And in this particular theory framework, there is a measure for that. There's also a measure to measure family functioning. There's a lot of different measures that can measure family functioning. There's one specifically recommended for this particular model, but either way, I can measure those things. So in the family leisure measurement, we're measuring actual duration. How much are you doing of this? Do you do this? How often? How long each time? That's what we're measuring when we measure family leisure with this particular framework. And then family functioning breaks it down into core or cohesion and adaptability. So then I'm able to look at numerically the relationship between these things. Families that do more together, undo, it's supposed to be an arrow. Families that do more, do better. So what's the cliche? The family that plays together stays together. There's actually data that supports that. All because there's a model and a theory, a framework to think about to help organize that thinking. What do you guys think about a model? There's not, what's that?
It's helpful.
I mean, when I first learned about this, I was like, that's so easy. So easy. So now if I'm working with families and I know that this is kind of the relationship between family leisure involvement and family functioning, and I'm working, say, in a treatment center, and I know that families don't do a whole lot together because we're a dysfunctional family, but I'm the therapist and I'm trying to work with them on making their family function better, what might I prescribe? Family leisure, family activities, right? Hey, I can probably even get more detailed than that and tell them what kind they need to do by first measuring and seeing how much they do already. Probably they're really low in the core activities because core activities help develop cohesion right? And how well they work together. And this is a dysfunctional family, so they probably don't work well together. So the assumption then is that they don't do a whole lot of core. So if I can recommend that you do things like bake cookies together, it seems a little bit too simple, doesn't it? It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be something so intense and so crazy. It can be simple. Theories can offer simple, I don't want to say solutions, but simple steps to achieving problems in practice. Thoughts? I started drawing pictures and you guys got real quiet.
It just kind of makes more sense now in this picture. It's like easier to look at. Can like picture like everyone's idea, different ideas could apply to this model.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more visual anyway, so I don't have any questions because I can see it.
So this is the purpose of a model, is to provide you a roadmap, right? So let's say that I do work with dysfunctional families. I'm using that very broadly and kind of fast and loose there, right? I'm going to assume that core activities develop cohesion and balance activities develop adaptability based on what the model is telling me. So I measure these things, a one-time thing, and I can do statistical magic to see for this particular type of family, what contributes most to their family functioning. Well, I can tell you, because I did a study on this with this exact population, that core for these types of families who have a child in mental health treatment, they don't develop, core activities don't develop cohesion, they develop adaptability. And balance also develops adaptability. So this is what my data showed me. Like, oh crap, it doesn't follow the paths in the model. What does that mean? Is the model wrong?
No. Just in that situation, it didn't apply.
Well, it's not that it didn't apply. It's that when you get into the details of a certain population or a certain, it's different, and that's okay. A model is meant to be a broad, overarching view at behavior, right? It can't explain every single dynamic and situation. Okay, so you use it as a starting point, and then you see. But generally, if I were to like take a step back and not break it down into core and balance, it's still family leisure, still predicting family functioning, still contributing to family functioning. But it's just the small details that are different, and those are dependent on the types of families. So there is 20 years worth of research using this core and balance model, and it's looked at a zillion different family types. Single parent families, dual parent families, families who have adopted children, families with kids with developmental disabilities, families with kids with autism, specifically autism, Mexican American families, Samoan families, Canadian, New Zealand, Australia, the UK. Man, we have like 1,000 family sample from the United States. We have just a kid's perspective. We have just dads. We have single dads only. We have single moms only. I mean, we got like every combination of family, right? Since family is defined very broadly by our society. And all of it says the same thing, that families that do more together are better functioning. Now, when you break it down into these details about which element, core, balance, predicting which element of family functioning, it's all a little bit different for every family, and that is okay. The model itself gives us a way to understand the relationship between, very broadly, leisure involvement and family functioning. Without this model, I don't think that we would have such an easy way to understand the relationship between the two. If we were to somehow measure something in a systematic way that made sense in terms of family leisure, and then also happen to measure systematically family functioning, without this model, we wouldn't really know how to put them together, right? We would just have some information. Okay, so a model provides that roadmap to understand and interpret findings. Without it, we can try to interpret, but it could be a little messy.
Do people ever use this model to help educate families in the process
Yes.
of treatment? That would be really neat.
Yes, I did that.
Just
For my
like, from like
dissertation.
an adopted mom standpoint, I would be like,
No,
this is how I'm supposed to do it.
I did it with families who have, in practice, basically families who have kids with autism. They came to a family camp, and I had a leisure education session with them, right? We do leisure ed. This is a really pretty easy model to understand, right? So I drew these pictures on a whiteboard for them, and I explained the two types of family leisure. I explained family functioning, how they relate to each other, what types impact what types. And they were like, oh, okay. I also gave them the actual measures to fill out so I could measure their leisure involvement and their family functioning. And I crunched all their numbers for them. And then I even pulled numbers from our national data set and said, this is how you compare to norm families in the United States. And this is how you compare to families who have kids with developmental disabilities just broadly, some of which also include autism, but broadly developmental disabilities. So they were able to look at their numbers and compare. Some of them were better functioning than the norm families. That's validating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Considering their families who have kids with autism who are often told you're doing it wrong and your kid's messed up and this, you know, they get a lot of critique. Okay, so to have all of a sudden some numbers that say, hey, we're not doing so bad after all, was really good for them. Some of them looked and said, we're low in this, we're low in that. And we were able to kind of brainstorm some ways. Well, we don't do any balance because as a family with a child with autism, he doesn't respond well when we have changes in routines and everything. So we can't just like spring something on him. We have to have the same stuff happening all the time. Or because of his behavioral issues, we can't go on vacation anywhere because he can't handle the stimulation of Disneyland. So they have really low balance. Well, let's come up with some other things that you can do. It doesn't have to be Disneyland, you know, so a very practical use for something that seems like way out here in abstract land, right? A theory or a model, but it has a very practical use in practice. Any thoughts?
Where do you find models? Like
In
do
the
you
literature.
Do you research, like, would you like just say, like, include in your research the word model? Or would you just be reading and like the model?
You could, yes, to all of that. So this has the word model in it. So if you did that, it would probably pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them have the word model in it. So I'll draw another one that I'm pretty sure you guys probably know what it is without me putting the title on it.
Leisure ability model.
Flow.
Oh.
Right? So this is skill and ability. No. What is it? Skill and challenge. Challenge. Right? So the word model isn't in that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were searching just the word model, it wouldn't come up. So where do you find them? Yeah, you have to, it's just the more you read, the more you find stuff. But there is not always a visual model to go along with every theory. I would say most of the time there isn't. And a visual model is just meant to visually represent the relationships. So you can have a theory without a model, and that's okay too. Okay. So I think this is probably good for our discussion of theory. I think you guys got it. It is the probably most important element. We do not do a theoretical research. What does that mean?
Did you say a theoretical?
A theoretical research. What does that mean?
Like not based off the theory.
Mm-hmm. That means every thesis, every dissertation, every project. Projects are a little bit different, but thesis and dissertation, if you don't have a theory, not going to happen. You must have a theory to support your frame of thinking, why you are doing what you're doing.
Do you have more than one?
Yes.
Oh.
So the core and balance model is based on other theories. So family systems theory is a foundational theory for the core and balance model and the core and balance framework. Family systems theory says that all members of a family system are interconnected, that they impact each other. You take one person out and change that person. If you put it back into the system and the system is unchanged, it will change that changed element back to fit within that system because systems don't like change. So we're talking about like youth treatment, right? If you take the kid out of the family, do all this therapy, and you don't do anything with the family, what happens when that kid goes home?
Or they go back to their old self.
Relapse, right? Exactly. So family systems theory is one of the foundational elements to the core and balance model, that you can't work with people in isolation when they are impacted by all of these other systems, right? All of the other people in their family. They're impacted by their community systems. There are lots of different systems and subsystems, and they interact with each other. And so we cannot work with people in isolation. So that's why we work with the family. There are some other theories incorporated into the family functioning literature that add to the theoretical foundation for the core and balance model itself. But the core and balance model isn't necessarily a theory. It's a visual representation of how to think about all of those other theories together as it pertains to leisure and
So I have a question.
family well-being.
So if you're just like working at a place that does recreational therapy and doesn't have like other therapies or anything like that, would you do therapy with your patient, like just your patient, but then also have a family session as well, even if like with any kind of population? Because my internship, there was like a couple therapists per unit, and we had 7 units, but then there was only one rec therapy department. So we did therapy with all of the units. So like if you're on unit 7, you just go to your unit 7 therapist, but you see the rec therapist just like all the other units do. So they would have family sessions within the unit, but we never met with the families. We never saw the families or anything. We just saw the patient. That's why I'm asking. Yeah. So I'm asking the question, because I feel like it is very important to also talk to them about recreational therapy. Not
What
just,
kind of a facility is this?
It was a behavioral health hospital.
All the more reason to be doing the family stuff. So,
Yeah.
If you're talking about maybe long-term care where somebody's not going to go home back to that because they're there until they die,
Yeah.
then I would still recommend doing family sessions and everybody together as a family, but maybe it's not as imperative as knowing that you're taking somebody out of that system and then putting them back at a later date, and not including anything for the system. But do you do something separately for them, or do you try to do something together? I would say it's probably better if you do it together, but
It's super unfortunate because we actually weren't allowed, like when we were running groups, if we were doing like leisure ed, and I worked in behavioral too. So we would base all of our groups on, how can you take this out of here and how can you replace your bad habits with healthy leisure? And I actually got in trouble for letting a patient's sister come in, and she wanted to see what it was about. She was so interested in what we were doing. And we weren't allowed.
So I think it's all about how you set it up, because was the sister just watching, or?
I included her.
Yeah.
We were doing like, it was like social Jenga, but / coping skills, and whatever. And
Sounds
So even though she was involved, and even though she's a sibling, there's still HIPAA protections for people. And so that's probably why, if it's not part of the policy of the facility to allow family members to attend and participate in sessions, then technically that's why.
Well, and it was unfortunate for that it was actually just the 3 of us. There was no one else in the room, so I was like, yeah, just come in, like, but yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if there was a bigger group there definitely is. I didn't really think about
but
that.
even in one-on-one, one family member, and there's still HIPAA
if she's
there.
not on,
yeah, you have to kind of work all that out. It's part of, if you worked it out as part of the treatment plan that a sibling or a parent, comes and participates in 1 session a week, then that wouldn't be an issue. But I think it has to be predetermined and kind of, Okay. Theory. Good. Everyone has to have a theory. Just leaving it out there. All right, so let's move to evidence-based practice, because it seemed like you guys were really like raring to talk about this today, and had a lot of really, really, really good comments about it. So let's just do a broad definition. What is evidence-based practice? And for the online students, please unmute yourself and participate. Don't just type in the chat. I realize that it's easier to do that, but it's really hard to follow along. And also the people who are watching our class cannot see the chat. So like the recorded, sorry, we're watching the recording later on down the road. They can't see the chat at all ever. So if you never participate in any way other than the chat, then half our class is missing out on it. So unmute yourselves and jump in. We can hear you. What is evidence-based practice?
You're providing the best
Crickets. Is this a hard question? You guys have a lot to talk about on
You're
the
providing
discussion.
the best possible care that is known and proven to provide the best outcomes based on evidence.
Okay. So what I heard you say is providing the best care to achieve the best outcomes based on evidence. That's what basically I just repeated what you said. Okay. Is evidence just one study? No. It's an accumulation, right, of good quality information from which you can then say, we will do this because this is what I'm being told to do. Right? This
And
is
it
what
will yield so and such results.
Exactly, right? Because they use a theory that says this is how it will happen. And there's enough evidence of that happening and being in line with that theory. So for example, if you develop a family leisure education program based on the core and balance model and the 20 years worth of literature, you have an evidence-based program. Because you have 20 years of literature saying that families that do more together function better. So if you develop something that helps increase their leisure education or their leisure involvement, then you are doing evidence-based care, evidence-based practice. So it has to be the accumulation of knowledge.
Which is why we do systematic review.
Yes, so there are ways to accumulate that knowledge, and the systematic review is one of them. I think this is actually the readings for next week. So you'll get to read an example or two examples of systematic reviews for next week, and they are not easy to do. So I wrote one of our readings for next week and got it published, and it's a systematic review of the core and balance literature. And it took me like 7 years to write this paper and get it published. And it took me a really long time to find all of it. I literally found everything ever published about this. So, but that's what it takes if you want to say, do this with families and this will happen, right? I literally had to read everything there was about family leisure before I could come out and say, this is how you do it, right? I feel like somebody's going to weigh in.
I think in many years, what I've learned is pretty much educate, that people know that this is what we know works. And then again, of course, doing the research and getting that information out there. So you got to pass that information on, which I think that's the hardest thing. And I've put a couple times, I've put in some notes that, how do we get this information out there? I know there's some good ideas, but getting people to hang on to that information or to absorb that information and pass it on themselves, because we're good examples of people who want that knowledge and are willing to go through all the process of doing it. But you get people in workshops and conferences and they're in a class for 1 hour or 2 hours and they're gone, and so is the information. How do we get them to hold on to it and pass it on?
So this is one of the problems, I think, that was addressed in the article, Problems with Evidence-Based Care. How do you get people to use it? The billion-dollar question, right?
Right.
How many of you guys use evidence in practice? Go to the literature when you're about to start an intervention with somebody that you've never done before How many of you go to the literature to find out about it?
That's how I got involved with the essential oils.
Okay, so I see 3-ish people you did for a project. Right. Okay.
That's how I practiced, but I had the convenience of a master's program side by side. So I had the literature available to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to do quite a bit of research, and I didn't have, like Clemson's library available to me. So actually, it was really hard, even looking at the limited journals that we had. But having to build programs and actually try to teach other people what the best practice is, because that tends to be my job, is because we're working with people that maybe aren't at a level of skill. So I have to figure out what the best practice are and then try to train them to be able to do it at their level of ability. So it is a challenge.
And remind me of what facility you work in, what kind of facility?
Long-term care.
Yeah, okay, so long-term care is a really, really good example about the availability of best practices. So we have these things called clinical practice guidelines. The article talked about it a little bit. Do you know if Rec Therapy has any clinical practice guidelines?
Yeah, ATRA.
No, ATRA is not a clinical practice guideline. It's a professional organization.
Oh, NCCRC.
The dementia.
NCTRC is a credentialing agency.
I know.
The dementia protocol.
Yes, so 2 people just said it. The dementia practice guidelines are the only clinical practice guidelines that recreational therapists have to say, this is how you practice with people with dementia.
Right. And then you have to renew that, and it's very expensive to renew it. And I said, I'm not going to renew that because I'm practicing that dementia protocol, and it's kind of frustrating that you can't recertify without paying a huge amount of money. So that's kind of frustrating. And then they talked about bringing on pain and depression, and they never did that, which you can also use in the nursing home.
So the dementia practice guidelines are, you do have to buy them. It's just not freely available. But what I want to point out about them is that, do we work with only people with dementia and therapy?
No.
Then why are the only clinical guidelines we have for people with dementia? There's not enough research. You just hit it on the head, right? So how do clinical practice guidelines get produced, get developed?
By researching and figuring out what does work and then publishing it.
But it's not just enough to research what works and publishes it. There has to be enough, it's not just practicing either. There has to be enough of it that you can then gather it and go through it and organize it and determine from there what is the best way.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So Linda Buettner is the one who wrote the dementia practice guidelines. Her entire career was only working in dementia. That's it. And we talk about dementia and rec therapy. If you're going to do that for your thesis or your dissertation and you don't cite her somewhere, it is like not citing Bandura if you're talking about self-efficacy. You're missing the key person and all of the key work related to that population in that particular area. Okay, so all of her research was about this. She's not the only one who produced it, but in terms of rec therapy, she is the most prolific producer. She's passed away recently, a few years ago, I believe. So
is there like a guideline or a
Linda
certain
Buettner.
Amount of research that will qualify for the development of another population's practice guidelines?
Yeah, so I don't know if people online could hear Heather in her very quiet voice.
Sorry,
I don't
know what I'm saying half the time. So
is there a certain amount of research, amount of evidence that is required before you can then gather, produce guidelines for one of the other populations? Somebody online needs to mute their mic because we can hear your puppy dog.
Yes, it's my therapy dog.
Yeah, make sure we're muted. Yep. So I don't know if there's like a magic number to say that this is how much you need. We need 25 studies or 20 years worth of research I don't know that it's that, but you could have 20 years of garbage and say, I've got 20 years of research and this is how we do family leisure. And that would be not as useful as maybe 5 really well done randomized controlled trials.
Do you know of any person right now working on another guidelines for like another population?
I don't know for any other population. So all of my research is in the veterans area, and I know a rec therapist who is determined, all of his work has been with veterans, all of his rec therapy work is determined to somehow produce the best practices for veterans in rec therapy. But there is such little research to support any evidence of outcomes or anything for veterans, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to help produce some of that research. I don't know if I'll be the one, or Brent, because he's my other colleague who does the veterans and rec therapy research. I don't know if we'll be the ones to produce the guidelines for how to work with veterans in rec therapy. But isn't it interesting that the VA is the #1 employer of rec therapists in the nation, yet we have no veterans clinical practice guidelines?
That's interesting.
Interesting. I don't know if anybody else finds that interesting, but I find that interesting. So you're right, Claire, that one of the main reasons is that we just don't have enough evidence pertaining to these other populations to be able to gather it and say this is the best practice with this group. And I'm sure, and it took a lifetime of work for the dementia guidelines. Go ahead.
So do you think that practice guidelines is what leads to competencies, or do you think competencies lead to practice guidelines?
When you say oh shoot, you cut out on the end there. What was that last piece?
Nothing. It's raining really loud here, so I'm going to mute myself so that you guys don't hear all that.
So when you say competencies, are you talking about like the rec therapist competencies in doing the job, or what do you mean by competencies?
Well, yeah, so one of the things when we started trying to standardize the nursing assistants, one of the problems that we had was there wasn't enough shared competencies that you could be a licensed assistant in New Hampshire and then be a CNA, a certified one in Massachusetts. There wasn't the reciprocity. And it was because everybody was trained in their own way. So one of the first things that was really done to try to elevate direct care workers, which I think over the last 15 years, I think we have seen progress with them being, at the bottom of the field. And I would say now, because there has been certain things such as standardizing competencies and saying, every program has to have these elements. And when people graduate, they have to have these core skills, that they've elevated their field. You can trust now what the certification or the licensure holds. And at this point, I would say that even, CNAs have, when I first started in long-term care, rec assistants were held in higher esteem than CNAs in a lot of ways. But because there's not any certifications or those competencies, I think now we're starting to see, and pay is starting to be comparable to that. So, one of the things that this kind of brought out to me was, without those core competencies and to be able to trust things, it's hard for me in my position where we have to talk a lot about shared risk and concerns. Recreation people aren't even allowed to do transfers or even, contact guard assist, because I can't show anybody that they've gotten those simple skills that a CNA would walk out of a Red Cross class having.
Yeah. I don't know if practice guidelines would necessarily be the only thing that would help develop competencies or help outline what the competencies are, but I don't see how it could hurt or not hurt having those things. Because you're right. In the process of saying that this is how you work with someone with dementia, there has to be kind of an equal amount of information about what it takes to do those things as well. So you need to be able to have these skills, et cetera, et cetera. in order to do these activities with this population. So I don't know if that the competency side is the intention. I don't think the competencies is the intention of producing clinical guidelines, but it could be a byproduct, if that is a semi-answer to your question. Okay. All right, so there are some steps here for, the article talked about this, how to do evidence-based practice. What are the steps? We are not a talkative bunch tonight.
Formulate a clear question based on the patient's problem.
Okay, so this is really making this very applied to practice, right? Because evidence-based practice. So we're not talking about up here in abstract land, just research for research's sake and producing knowledge. We're trying to apply it to practice. Step 2.
Search databases for relevant clinical evidence.
Okay, so you guys are getting a little bit of a hint of that, right? Here in the process of doing your TIS form. And then as you go into your evidence table, and then into your master's students, your annotated bibliographies, and then the doctoral students into your lit reviews, you're going to do a whole lot of searching of databases to find relevant literature. Okay, step 3.
Praise the evidence.
Appraise it, that's right. So determine what is good, what is bad, what is maybe questionable, what is outright garbage. And unfortunately, garbage gets published. So we have to be critical in how we determine what's good or bad. Step 4.
Implement. Use it in your findings in your practice.
Use
Apply
it. Okay, so it doesn't do anything if we just find it and don't use it, right? So we have to implement somehow in our practice the things that we find in the process of learning everything we can learn about family leisure and family functioning. If I know that these types of activities produce this, I should probably put those types of activities into my family leisure interventions, right? If I know that these types of activities produce these types of outcomes for veterans, and I want to achieve those same outcomes, I should probably use those activities, okay? And then step 5. Evaluate the change in your practice after using those things. So somebody asked a really good question in the discussion that actually I think it might have come out of the readings that they made a comment about it, that somewhere in the reading it said that somebody started implementing the recommendations out of like a big systematic review, but that the outcomes didn't change. It supported the clinical guidelines or something that had already. Yeah.
It was like for low back pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your question about it? Yeah, I know. I'm trying to remember back to.
Let me go to the discussions.
Right. So why? No, I don't want to try to figure out what your question was without just reading it. So. Duo.
Okay. I said, I'll just read
No, it didn't. Yes.
I said, I think this scenario gives light to the issue that some practitioners have about using EVP because of the fear of losing autonomy. In this situation, showing how new research and evidence continues to support old evidence still allows a practitioner to have a choice in how they treat their clients, and it is good to know that what was already in place still holds true. I don't think it was a question, they had just stated.
Okay.
My thoughts.
Somebody else might have asked a question about it.
No one replied to me.
So I think that when
Sorry.
I think one of the other questions was if we're doing, here's the way that we've always done it based on no evidence, right? This is based on tradition. And we do this research to then have new ideas and new knowledge and new evidence about how we should do things. And it just supports the old way that we've always done it. What's the need of producing the new knowledge? What's the thought there? Why produce? I'm going to put that back on you guys. Why do the research if, the first couple, handful, 5, 10, whatever studies just supports what we've always done.
Well, it can validate the practices that we're doing already.
Yes, it validates what we've already done, which is a very important thing to do, right? See, I told you that by doing this, this will happen. And now I have the proof that we never use that P word, right? I have the evidence that supports what I said would happen. So if we're talking about requests for funding or having to justify your existence or your program's going to be cut or whatever, now you have some proof, evidence, right? That it works. Okay.
And then we have the years that we need, like we can have more and more, like you said, because we said we need to have evidence-based practice. We need a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. So if we just keep doing it, we're building that knowledge base for future years to now have a knowledge base where in the past we never had one. I kind of see it as you got dang lucky, right? That what you were doing was actually correct and working out. Just because there was no evidence before and now we have some and it says what you're doing was right doesn't mean we didn't need the evidence. Okay, we do. We just were really lucky. What happens if this is how we've always done it and we do a study or 10 studies and the 10 studies say, don't ever do it that way again?
While we go to conferences, we keep up with what's current in our profession.
That's right. So it keeps us on our toes, always building our competencies, always increasing our skills and increasing our knowledge. And if we have to completely stop doing something some way because now there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that says this is not the way to do it, not the best practices, we should stop doing it that way. It sure does, right? Do we have any examples of treatments that have stopped doing it this way and now do it this way based on new? I'm sure that it does happen because medicine. Say that again?
I remember something from one of Glenn's classes about the use of lithium, but that's no longer used. I don't remember what it was for. But
I thought about
antibiotics.
Validation therapy.
Yeah.
Not always a good thing to use validation therapy. It has its place, but not use it all the time.
Gina, can you say that all over again? We couldn't hear you.
Okay, validation therapy. It has its places, but not to use it all the time with somebody who's demented. To not tell somebody, in the past we would tell somebody, your mother is dead. This is 2001, whatever, and go over and over again and tell them the reality of what is going on and finding out later on that was a bad thing to do. You don't tell somebody that their mother is dead because they're going to relive that death over and over and over again. And that was, the thing you did, but you don't do that anymore. And to use it in moments that you don't. And that's one thing that comes to mind of something that, everybody would preach to do, and now you just don't do that.
And that decision to stop that practice likely didn't just somebody wake up today and say, we're not doing this anymore, right? It had to have come, I imagine, from some evidence that this is not the best way to do and that it produces these traumatic experiences over and over and over again. Somebody had the bright idea to study that particular theory. Thank you, because I agree that that's, we don't need to do that. What's your comment?
Well, we had a patient on our dementia unit, and we have to ask them every day, what your name is, what's today's date, who the president is, and what's the season or something. And so at the beginning, when she got there, we'd ask her who the president is, and she would say her son, and we would say, no, it's Donald Trump, and she'd get really agitated and very aggressive.
A lot of people get agitated and aggressive with that.
And we'd be like, no, it's not your son, it's actually Donald Trump. She'd get really mad. So then, whenever we'd ask her, again, we would just be like, okay, we wouldn't tell her that it was Donald Trump because it would increase her agitation and make her more angry when she was perfectly fine before.
There are so many metaphors in that story.
Actually, I had a similar experience in a nursing home. I had this client who's in the Alzheimer's unit, and her husband had died, and it was really terrible for her. Obviously, it would be for anyone, but I feel like she was especially had a really difficult time when her husband died. And she would have dreams where she'd relive it in her dreams when he died and wake up screaming and screaming, and you'd have to go and she'd say, I had a dream my husband died. And she'd say, it's not real, right? And I'd say, no, it's not real. He's okay. He's running errands. And, you know. But like for a while, she said, her daughter told me for a long time, she would tell her, yeah, he died. And she would just relive his death every day, and it was terrible. And then she finally figured out to stop doing that and just say, no, he's on his way. He's running. He's at the store or something. And then she'd go, oh, thank God.
You know, this opens the whole door to ethics in practice and ethics in research. So this is just one example, you know, but shoot, they gave people syphilis just to see what would happen way back in the day.
And electric shock therapy.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, so, and I hate to say that produced some
They still
level
do
of
CT.
evidence and knowledge for future. It did, but, you know, this ethics piece is a whole different, you know, element of the evidence as well. So side tangent, but, okay. So what were we talking about?
Things
So
that we don't do anymore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it all comes from evidence. So in these steps of producing evidence, you guys are going down this path of producing evidence-based practice, or at least learning a few of the steps to doing this. And hopefully you'll take it with you as you go back into your practices and have more skill to actually start producing the evidence. Who's responsible for producing the evidence in our field?
Us.
We as in practitioners, or we as in graduate students, or we as in faculty members?
We as
Like
in
everybody.
CTO.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
We should record that and like play that really loud or something at ATRA or whatever. What's the
You after that's not happening.
Everybody.
that was just recorded forever. Good thing Marika, our new ATRA president, didn't hear me say that. No, whatever. Why? So we all just said that, but I think part said that we are all responsible for it. But I think part of the reason why is because we've now had, this is our third week. We've had 3 weeks of talking about how important it is and why we're going to do that. But a month ago, would you have said that we are all responsible for producing the evidence for our field? Or would you have identified one group over another?
I would have said all of us.
You would have said all of us? Okay, what?
I probably would have identified one group over another, which is why I was talking about my aha moment with the reading, which is we all want to be in the same ballpark as like the horrible PTOT conversation, but we have to do stuff to get ourselves there. We just don't get to be categorized with those groups, and we're not doing what we need to be doing to get ourselves there.
Right now,
We've got great people in the field, but the field is a collective.
absolutely.
Not
Right now, who has the ability to produce in our field? If we're talking about practitioners, graduate students, and educators, who has the ability, the knowledge, skills, capacity, whatever,
so MS and above.
to produce the knowledge?
So the faculty for the most part. And then
But we're
you
BS
guys.
entry level, so all the people that need to be implementing this into the field don't have the privilege to be involved with the research.
How many practitioners do we have in rec therapy in our nation? Does anybody know? I think we have something in like the 13,000 rec therapists or something like that.
That's all.
How many faculty members are there in rec therapy?
Probably like
5,000.
How many faculty members across the nation are there in rec therapy educators?
100.
Let's say in the 100 range, which is high in terms of at all levels, including recently retired Peg Connolly type people.
yeah, the
Okay.
people that
I wouldn't even go 100. I'd say maybe 50. Okay. Who's going to produce the knowledge? Are we leaving it to the backs of 50 people or the shoulders of 50 people when there are 13,000-ish, people who could? Let's use PT as an example then for the same thing. How many practicing PTs are there?
God, I have no
100,000.
clue. Yeah.
I don't even know, but way more than 13,000, right?
Yeah.
And what is their education level?
Doctorate.
Doctorate. And how
And
many
then
PT
definitely
educators are there?
Lots.
Way more
Tons.
than RT educators?
More than 50.
So in terms of like the number of evidence producing people in PT versus RT, what are we looking at?
100,000 versus 50 right now.
So the responsibility for producing the evidence, the knowledge base for our profession cannot be shouldered by faculty
No.
and graduate students. We grow our numbers when we talk about graduate students, but it cannot at all. And so here we are saying PT and OT and rah, 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 you're crossing into our area, our scope of practice. And how come you're doing this? And here then amongst ourselves, we say, how are they doing that? How are they doing that?
Because we're not doing anything
Well,
else.
we're not doing anything, and they have 50,000 more people than we do
Yeah.
doing it, right?
Well, and a lot
Because
of
their
them don't-
practitioners have the skill.
Yeah, a lot of my cousins, they're 3 of them are PTs, and one of them works in Charlotte. One went to MUSC, and when I started in rec therapy, I had the intention of going to PT school. And then when I fell in love with rec therapy, I told them, like, I'm not going to go to PT, because they were all excited. It's like a family tradition. And I'm like, I'm going to stick with rec therapy. And they're like, what is that? Like, what even is it?
Yeah.
And so I feel like they don't even know that they're encroaching on our territory, because they don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
They're like, they have no idea that that's
No,
even,
they don't.
it's not even like a conscious, like, I feel like we can't really get mad about it, because they don't know that they're even doing
No.
it.
I mean,
I feel like
OT is
OT
a
knows
different
more
story.
little
OT
people,
knows.
Yeah.
There's a lot more overlap between OT and RT than there is PT and RT, and I think
Yeah,
OT is
I don't think
intentional
PT's
about what they're
even
grabbing.
Yeah, that's
Um, but somebody said in their comments in the discussion that OT is moving to master's entry and doctoral entry, and they're going to be in the same boat as PT, where all of their frontline service providers are doctorate level educators. So I'll tell you, at that level, you have at least 5 stats classes and research methods classes. How many, I think I asked this question on the first day of class, how many of you in your undergrad had stats or research methods?
by choice. It wasn't required.
research.
A sliver.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, stats and research methods are 2 totally different classes.
I took it, but I had a minor in psychology.
Yeah.
I took that research.
And somebody
methods on
else
top
said
of
that same thing. It's because I took all these psych classes, I
Yeah.
think Gina maybe, but
Yeah. It was because of psych, although we did have a couple in our TR program, but I took a lot of psych classes, so that required me to do a lot of research programs. So, and I did have statistics class.
yeah, here at Clemson, the undergrad RT students get 10 RT specific classes, which is double what is required by NCTRC. They get no stats and no research methods.
They don't take
Wait, I thought it was required. We
I
have
thought it
like
was
a math.
She's like, what the?
You took one?
Above and beyond, and you're better prepared
Yeah,
to
you were prepared to what is to come next semester.
Yeah.
Well, that's, see, for our stats class, the guy that's teaching us keeps saying, like, this should be a refresher from undergrad. So, like, what would you guys do if you didn't have an undergrad class?
Come with it with us, and I'm scared
Yeah,
to
I'm
death.
saying.
Okay,
Sit there
so
for
you're
6 hours
you're
like-
scared to death, and now
Okay,
you're going to
I
go
did
out
today.
as a practitioner at the end of this year, and somebody's going to say, "Let's do a study together. You're a master's student. You should know how to do this." Because as you guys all leave with a master's degree, online and in person, the expectation is that you now have the ability to do research, and you should, at the end of this program, be able to actually do it because you have the master's degree, and we at Clemson give you that skill and competence through our degree. Now, there are other master's degrees in rec therapy that you do not walk out with that skill, and those are entry-level master's degrees. Ours is an advanced practice degree, so you get the advanced
I'm
elements.
confused why you would want that.
Yeah, why would
Master's
you?
degree.
Our field doesn't really care.
Why would you get a rec therapy undergrad and master's at the end of master's? I just don't like. I'm confused.
Because
I'm
there's
going to be brave
no,
and raise my hand and say I have that,
yeah.
unknowing that that's what I was getting myself into.
Oh.
Now I can
if you
walk.
were in the area, I guess I could understand. Like that was probably what was best for you right there.
Yeah, like it was my like I went to IU for undergrad, and then I did IU like 6 years later for my master's, thinking that I was just going to be a better practitioner, but not realizing that that's what that master's program had to offer.
So how do we tell people
I'm a good practitioner, but I
that you
suck
would,
at stats.
you would need to get the research degree?
There's not that many out there offered.
There are not
How many?
I don't think there are any other advanced practice master's degrees. I think Clemson is the only one.
And then
The
plus
point
online.
here in being is that the educational RT education opportunities across the board, across our nation, vary widely. And so the preparation of our practitioners, entry-level practitioners, varies widely.
Absolutely.
So then, what was that?
I said, no, absolutely. And I cover the whole country. So even if I get someone that has a rec therapy degree, I don't know what they can do. And it's really hard for me to advocate it sometimes. I mean, what you're talking about right now is exactly, I mean, I have UNH in my back door, but I wanted to come to Clemson because of the research, because I feel like that is such a key need right now. And how do I partner with people in the field so that we can build this? And with that, can we create these standards so that I can trust that a rec therapist, and I bring it back to transferring, because I'm like, yes, rec therapists should be able to transfer, but I can't show where we've learned, everybody's gone through, kinesiology in a way that actually shows body mechanics. And for us to do a lot of exercise programs and different things like that, I have to be able to show that.
Well, and so theoretically, like the job task analysis should be able to demonstrate our competencies, because in order to take our exam, you have to have had certain classes, and we have to identify which classes. I mean, you guys don't see this from the student level, but as the faculty level, as we're developing courses and making sure that we're kosher for NCTRC, we have to demonstrate where we're addressing all of the job task domains in our classes. So this is where we went through at our master's level, and we were looking at what was required of people. And this is why we did away with our master's, our entry-level master's, which is why you have to be certified in order to come to our master's degree, because we weren't addressing some of the basic core competencies in an advanced practice class, because the assumption is you got that in an undergrad. And so we did away with it because we were sending people unprepared to take the exam. And then beyond that, unprepared to go to practice. They couldn't do transfers, or they didn't have disability knowledge, because we don't teach a disability class at the grad level. We teach 2 at the undergrad level. But if you don't have that, so this is where like these variations in educational programs, and then the variations in skills that come out of that, all of that plays into so many aspects in practice. One of them, and which is what pertains to this class, is the ability to produce the evidence, the knowledge that we need to then be better practitioners, right? So, I mean, your guys' comments in the discussion thread were right on about this OT, PT, all these other professions who have different educational requirements, and because of it, they're moving light years ahead of where we are, and we're kind of stagnant and yelling about it amongst each other, and we're all nodding our heads but not doing anything about it. Yeah. This class is meant to help do something about it. The degree as a whole is, but this class specifically is to teach you how to go back, be a practitioner, and produce that knowledge, because we can't do it on our own as faculty, right? So the other thing that somebody brought up in a discussion about this was that, I think it might have been Tara. Actually, I opened them up right here. She was commenting about the discrepancy in the number of faculty members too, who could then teach the skill of doing this. Hold on, I'm going to skim through. Nope, that's next week. I know, somebody jumped the gun.
Shannon had done it before. I
She's
wonder
like
if she
a
did
week
every
ahead.
single week before.
Way to go, Shannon.
I noticed that the first week that she had done.
Tara had
Is
like
she in here
20
tonight?
comments.
I'm wondering if she just went ahead and read all of them and commented on all of them.
Okay, so
Preparing
here's
for ACTRA then.
where this whole master's level entry could be problematic. And I think Tara brought up a fantastic point, is that let's say that we make our field master's level entry. Do we have enough people, faculty members at the PhD level, to now educate all these people who need a master's degree, right? Can we flood Clemson's program all of a sudden with students? And how could we, I mean, we have 14 people in this class. How could we go from 14 to 40? Yeah. We actually did have 42 people in this applied research class last year, and it was too many, obviously. And so we had to split it into master's and PhD, and we had 11 PhDs and 31 master's students. Could you imagine taking this class with 31 other master's students? It was very, very, very difficult, and the outcomes, the experience was totally different. So we would have to have more faculty. We'd have to have multiple sections of classes, and obviously Clemson couldn't be the only one to take on all of those students. So we'd have to have other universities that have master's degrees in rec therapy in order to handle the influx of people. So who currently offers a master's program?
UNCG.
UNCG.
ECU offers one
IU.
online now. I'm
Oh,
pretty sure
yeah,
it's
they
like
do.
a hybrid program.
But they offer like an administration one.
Yeah,
It's
UT
not like
offers
a.
recreation
It's like administration and rec therapy.
I don't know. I went to like last semester.
But it's
I
still
looked at
master's
it.
degree in
They
rec
offered
therapy.
like
Oh,
rec
Brent
therapy.
went to
but it's like
ECU.
it like just became like
IU.
this liquid last year.
IU.
Temple.
Washington University.
Where? Where's that? What? Eastern? What?
Washington, but I'm not sure what their program is.
I can't hear you. What school?
Eastern Washington University, but it's not online.
Is it a master's degree?
Yeah, they started it a few years back.
Interesting.
They did a few years back. I don't know if they still do.
I think Oklahoma State has
Temple University.
I was
grad.
gonna say like Kansas or
University of New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, UNH. University of Utah does.
I'm pretty sure Clemson is the only one with a completely online program, though, aren't they? Or one of the few?
One of the few, but IU's is
no, I
completely
use
online.
completely
Connecticut
online.
Connecticut State is listed on Active site as a
FIU.
master's.
FIU's program is, I
Florida
think,
International.
I think that's being discontinued. Yeah.
Arizona State.
Miami.
Southern Illinois University,
Oh yes, they do. SIU.
Indiana University,
Got them.
Eastern
Arizona.
University.
Really? They do?
Eastern.
Oh,
It's just-
Springfield College in Western Mass
Oh,
also has one. Yeah.
A master's degree?
Yes.
Southern University in A&M College.
Well, I've never heard of some of these places, so
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
that's
a little
right.
bit curious
Yeah.
about what their master's
I actually
degrees
did a
look like.
seminar about this last year, actually. About
Springfield
who offered
College?
what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
There's a lot listed. ECU.
maybe
Well,
10-ish
I
that
had a-
are, how many of those are good quality
Yeah.
programs? I'm not really sure, and I don't want to pass judgment on any of
Yeah.
those
There's a
because I'm
lot.
obviously biased towards
There's, like, one
Clemson.
in Texas, too.
I had
But still,
I had a conversation with Peg and Jen about like, well, I love Western, so I was like, why don't you guys have a master's program? And it's like they wanted to, but like the funding, like the school was just like, we're not hiring more faculty. Like they just couldn't get the support that they needed to make that happen.
and would that change if our profession
Yes.
then
'Cause they have a
changed
PT
to
school in the same
Yeah.
building.
It's one that I originally wanted to do PT, which is why I went to Western and started the rec therapy. And I kind of like you, Claire, I fell in love with rec therapy, and I'm like, okay, I'm all set.
I feel like that's like I feel like most people want to use it as a springboard into something else, and
Yeah, they do.
unfortunately, even by I don't want to implicate anybody, but even by the faculty, like that's how it was introduced to me. Like, hey, if you
Ooh,
want to
not
go,
us.
yeah,
It was like
they
people
were
like,
like,
no one-
You're not allowed to
No.
speak the word PT.
Yeah.
When
Well,
I
I,
was-
I feel like that was their way. Like
Getting
most
you to
of
do
us,
it.
yeah, like most
Yeah.
of us ended up falling in love with it and like just staying our therapy all the way. But I feel like they were just so desperate to get people in the program,
yeah.
and now that's not really as much of a problem. It's growing, whatever. But it's still really discouraging because I feel like I see people are passionate about it, but they keep changing their careers because like how do we break that barrier? And like when does NCTRC take some like can they change the accreditation standards and make it more like I don't know something in undergrad?
NCTRC isn't an accrediting body.
Which one's the accrediting body?
CART?
CART. Like not every program is accredited, right?
There's only like 2
Oh wow.
So
that are CART accredited, but there's other accreditation.
should there be?
I think so.
Yeah, Western.
No, not for
Oh no, CART.
JACO is for healthcare organizations.
Yeah.
So academic accreditation is NRPA and CART and COPERT, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but not like the COPERT one and the NRPA one are not RT specific. CART is RT specific. You can get RT specific under NRPA, but not very many people have. So So where were you going? Changing
I mean, is
accrediting?
that, like, obviously it's better to be accredited program, right? Under the CART standards.
Some people would debate that, but I mean, we're going through
Well,
CART accreditation, a self-study right now to see if we want to become CART
Okay.
accredited. And it requires, getting CART accreditation requires us to up our educational program in a variety of ways. And so it makes it, I don't know, things trickle down to what the class experience is like differently under an accredited program than it is.
I think Western was because we talked about what that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the point, the intent with accreditation is to standardize the educational experience. That way we could, let's say everybody was CART accredited, then we would all know exactly what Kate is talking about, that you're coming out with a degree with these competencies.
Mm-hmm.
But because accreditation is not required, I mean, a department can be accredited and we can be a part of that department and be fine.
Yeah.
An RT program can be accredited separately than in a department, but most aren't. But as long as you have that department accreditation, then you have graduated from an accredited program, and that's the only requirement for NCTRC certification. But if we wanted to go ahead and make this standardized educational experience across the board for all RT education and do something like CART, where everybody is CART accredited, every RT program, our department is not getting CART accreditation here, just the RT concentration is, or looking at it. Then we would know that every RT graduate, regardless of what school you're at, Eastern Ohio something, or Clemson or Penn State or whatever, has the same exact educational experience because there's standardization across the board through accreditation. But that's not the case.
Well, and I was going to say, like, trying to grow the profession, so when I was an RA, I convinced a few of my residents to go to RT. And one was this guy who was super smart. He was a great student. He really loved RT. And then he graduated, and he could not find a job. And still right now, he graduated a year and a half ago. Huh? Yeah. He graduated like a year and a half ago, and he's working as an activities assistant at a nursing home. And
Jobs aren't out there.
Yeah, because he's like,
Right?
Well, he's actually I think he's about to join the military, because he's like, he called me one night and he was so disheartened because he was so excited about RT and then like could not find a job, and he's working like for no money at this place.
Well,
and
so
I mean, I feel so bad for him.
My question is where do you start? Like having that standardization across the board, like making it more, find the word that I'm looking for.
Are you talking about the education standardization? We have something like CART that already exists, but it's optional.
But how do you who decides, like, how could it ever be required of every, is that possible? Like, could NCTRC change their standards? Like, you have to come from
Yes, but that's not really the role of a credentialing body, and that's what NCTRC is. All NCTRC does is allow you to put the stamp of CTRS on your name. It is not the role of a credentialing body to set accreditation standards, but we as a profession have let NCTRC do that because we didn't have something like CART until recently. And so now CART is coming in and saying, these are the accreditation standards, this is the education requirement, but it's not yet required to do CART. And there are a lot of people who are heated about CART even existing, let alone trying to say that this is what you need to do, to say that you're a good quality RT program. And so, again, we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before, where we have a lot of the founding parents still actively involved in RT, the founding mothers and fathers of rec therapy, and they have opinions, and they're influential people. And I don't know, I'm not talking about anybody specifically, but they may have differing opinions and express them strongly. And the mid-level generation, not my generation or your generation, but maybe the in between me and the founding, I'm not that close to the pegs, but in age, but maybe they are listening to the founding parents more than they're looking at the future of our program. And so it's like, how do we grow as a profession in our education so that we have this standardized educational experience, so then our practitioners go out and everybody can do the same thing, and we can, I don't want to say measure up, but measure up to our sister cousin professions with OT and PT and be able to better advocate for self, produce our own knowledge and evidence, which then, I mean, that has a lot of implications, but the most important one is best practices. It's all this trickle down thing. Like, whoever thought, right? I mean, maybe it's obvious, but maybe not until you really talk about it, that your undergrad degree would result in this trickle out to best practices. But it does. And it's incredibly important. But listen to this discussion that we're having. Could you have this in an undergrad class?
No.
No, because they're just trying to get to the. Like,
they're just trying to figure out what the API process is, right? Okay. So, and now API'd, blew people's minds by adding a letter to it. Yeah.
It's still the same.
Okay, so
documentation.
Oh, that's
this
good.
is kind of why there's the.
Evaluation you document anyway. So.
Yeah.
This is
Back and
why
forth.
there's like the Clemson approach to graduate education. We have a different perspective on what we think graduate education is in RT is supposed to be about, which is why we don't have entry-level masters here. Okay, because we feel like this type of discussion has to happen. You will go out and be better practitioners because we've now planted some seeds. You're going to be more critical of your practice.
Well, and wouldn't it, I mean, I hate to use this word, but like the people who are using RT as a bouncing, like could weed out the people who aren't really serious about it. Because I feel like there are a lot of people that just like, oh, I heard rec therapy is easy, so I'm trying to get a degree.
Yeah, because they did.
And then they don't do any. Yeah, so it's like all
Or they
these
failed out. They
faculty-
tried PT and they failed out of
Yeah.
OChem or whatever, and so
Yeah.
now they end up in RT.
Yeah, and like the faculty are spending all this time and effort educating these people, and then they graduate and don't work in RT, and it's like, I mean, I hate to say it was a waste, but it's like,
But if it's master's level entry is what
Yeah,
you're
but they
saying,
wouldn't- they wouldn't do
it wouldn't
that.
happen as much
Yeah.
because you're not going to waste your time going to a master's degree in
If
a
you can't make it to the master's, then
you
Exactly.
shouldn't be in RT. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we do with those other students that need something else that don't have this yet?
Well, what do you do with people who are in exercise science and don't get into PT school? I mean,
they
do
get.
you be
They become
something
PE
else?
teachers.
Yeah, yeah.
Or they
Or
could be
some
RTAs,
trainers.
right? Because we can make the RTA the bachelor degree.
Yeah. Wait.
Well, like child
Kind of like
Oh,
OT,
yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
OT's
Yeah,
doing
what
right
he
now.
wants to do.
They're too.
Hey,
So-
check out the chat. They're talking about jobs for your
Yeah.
friend.
Oh, very nice.
At
That's so nice.
Atra
I'll tell
last
it.
year, I felt like there were a lot of people. There was like a session about like a quest for self. It's very like spiritual, like what do I want out of this kind of thing. And there were a lot of people too that seem to love the profession, but they're so burnt out by the disrespect and
Mm-hmm.
not being able. Some of them not being able to live comfortably financially,
Mhm.
but a lot of it was mainly just disrespect and like how can we show people that only we can do this? Like you're not trained to do this. You can't do
The
this.
evidence
Right. So,
that we don't produce.
well, and my bringing it back to the EVP, like I got exposure during my internship to EVP because it's required of the department, the whole clinical therapies department, to meet with their discipline and present evidence-based practice every month. And so we as interns had to do it as part of and this was nationwide children's requirement of us. This wasn't even required of my program.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like introducing it earlier on and, having more practices like that, like having those meetings and doing that more often, making it like built into your practice, make it less scary and more applicable. And
Absolutely. But if you could even get that before you start practicing, which is why in physical and mental health class, we made you guys pull articles to support your interventions, right? It's all coming around, right? You guys hated that last year, but now you're like, yes, it makes sense. But if you could get some exposure to it, and we didn't expect that you guys would have full competence in understanding the evidence, how to find it, how to use it, but an introduction to it. And then you can go out into practice and your practice then supports further development of that skill, right? If that's what we're going to be, if we're going to be a bachelor's level entry, then, and we don't teach all of the skill in our education programs, then we've got to have practice that supplements the learning. in addition to conferences that help supplement that learning through CEUs and things like that. But, I don't know if you guys have attended an ATRA, that sometimes sessions aren't always the most beneficial in terms of teaching these types of skills. Like, we're going to spend a semester talking about this. How do you teach that in one conference session, a 2-hour conference session? So there's got to be some way for the profession to help supplement the skill development.
Yeah.
And there are ways, but maybe they're not sufficient. Maybe webinars and random sessions here and there at ATRA aren't enough. Maybe our classes need to be offered online for practitioners to sign up to take one class here or there. A non-degree seeking student, I want to learn about applied research and rec therapy.
Yeah.
So our class now becomes a bigger size, or we have multiple sections of it to help build people's skills without having to go to grad school.
Speaking on that, sorry if I could take a second. I actually just had an interview with a community college nearby here, and they have a lifelong learning department. And so the person that interviewed me was looking at they look for people with specializations to bring in lifelong learners to like get CEUs, or to people that maybe haven't been in the field in a while and want to take classes and get refreshers. And so I'm kind of in the process of right now maybe potentially starting a program at this community college just to kind of do that, to do like just classes, those random classes that maybe, you didn't get the experience in your undergrad or whatever, and you want to learn more about something, not have to get maybe a full master's degree, but just take these classes just to educate yourself more. So,
and you don't have to take necessarily a class that has the word rec therapy in the title in order to have it qualify as a CEU. You could take a history of disability or disability legislation, or anything that is pertinent to our field, as long as you can kind of justify it. NCTRC will pretty much take that as a CEU, and I think it only takes like 1 or 2 classes. Graduate? Do they have to be graduate level?
2.
Or can they be undergrad level?
I think it's graduate.
To use as CEUs after you graduate.
Graduate.
I think it might have to be a graduate level class to obtain CEUs. You should check on that before you develop this up. But you only need 1 or 2 to cover your 5 years of CEUs. How many conferences do you have to go to in order to gain all of those CEUs that you could get from 1 or 2 grad level classes? A ton. But I would much rather spend 16 weeks talking to practitioners about this than try to condense this into a 2-hour session at ATRA.
And I think that you could really sell that better than being like, if you told them in one course, I would give you all of your CEUs, which I know that's like kind of like, you won't have to attend anything for 5 years, which is kind of a downside because then you won't be learning anything more for 5 years. But I think that sounds good. Like you're taking a class and getting all your CEUs at one time.
But let me ask you this. What do you think would be more beneficial? 16 2.5-hour sessions versus a 2-hour session at 5 ATRAs over, 5 ATRA conferences over 5 years. Where are you getting more knowledge? The class. So maybe it's okay to say 1 class in 5 years and you don't have to do anything else, because you're going to get content-wise way more content out of a class than you would out of a 1 session at a conference or 2 sessions at a conference. And so maybe it's okay to say don't do anything else. You can do this semester-long class. Really, that's 4 months worth of learning. So I don't know. We have like tangent and then come back and then tangent and then come back. But I think what we're getting at is that we have wide variations in education experiences, drastically different requirements for education compared to our allied health cousins. And because of that, our ability, and then we also have a drastically low number of people who have the skill to produce the knowledge that our field needs to have good, healthy practice happening, right? So we have this like compendium, a series of unfortunate events, right? Lemony Snicket, that is just like coming together to make it really difficult to produce knowledge. And so again, kind of bringing it back, this class is meant to give you that, to get out there. We spend 3 weeks of getting you hyped up about evidence and producing evidence and wanting to consume evidence and how we do it. And then next week, we're going to talk about the first type of thing that you can produce. And I'm not saying that it's easy to do any of this. It's not. I might be making it sound easier than it actually is, and I acknowledge that. But through the course of your master's degree or doctoral degree, you will have the skill to do this.
I also think there's a component that the facility that you're working at requires certain things of you. And that's hard for practitioners
That
to
they do or they
grasp.
should.
I just remember like coming on from community-based to like acute. My boss was like, it's your job to make sure the environment's therapeutic up here. You're the rec therapist. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And she was like, make it pretty. And I was like, that's not an event planner or your decorator. Like, I think that sometimes practitioners, when they get into different environments, that facility requires different things of them, and they're not always sure, like, what can I fight back on and what do I need to do to keep my job? Because I had a great job. I was a part of the treatment team. I led treatment teams. So it's crazy to me that you weren't able to even be invited to those treatment teams and talk to the families. And
I never got to go to treatment teams when I worked in residential treatment, but I was running all of their experiential stuff. And I never got to go.
So you just didn't have time to try and like huddle in the morning. You didn't even have time to chart review.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we didn't evaluate any of our stuff that we did because all of our documentation was on paper. There was no electronic documentation system.
Oh, wow.
And none at all. And so every patient medical chart was a throwing binder that sat on each unit. And after each therapy session, you went and had to put it in throwing binder. And going off what you said about having the facility like give you guidelines of like how to do things, our documentation, we didn't get to make it. Like it was pre-made for like all of the therapies. It wasn't the same for each therapy. Like the counseling therapy note was different than ours, but like it looked very similar. And like a lot of the things on there were like, you don't even need to measure this. Like just a lot of things were like very not stereotypical, but like behaviors were listed on there. But it didn't really like tell you what you needed to document. It was just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of the rec therapists that were there were very ticked off about it.
Yeah. Like some facilities, like when I did my community base, like they were like, this is what you do, this is how you do it, this is why you do it, and you don't have a say in it. But when I went to the acute facility, they were like, so you're the rec therapist and we need you to figure out how you're going to do your process. So you just let us know how that goes. But then other management would come on and they're like, so decorate, make the quiet room pretty.
Kate just called that the other tasks as necessary, as deemed necessary.
Yes.
That we all do. Okay. So one thing I want to spend the last 20-ish minutes doing here is taking an opportunity to formulate a clear clinical question around a patient's problem. This is something that all of you are going to have to do in the process of your thesis dissertation project is what is the question, what is the problem that you're trying to address in this study, in this project, in this whatever. So the article provides a couple of examples, but I think it would be beneficial if we work through, so take the population and the intervention that you're interested in doing, and let's see if we can formulate this into a question, convert it into a question. Because right now, you guys are telling me things like, I'm interested in looking at autism and physical activity for stress management. Okay, but what's the question? What's the problem? What's the issue if you were in practice?
Well, I mean, I thought of autism like with anxiety. Anxiety.
Okay, but I'm still trying to think of how to form into a question. Are you going to compare to something, another treatment? Is one treatment better than others?
Can I compare to one?
Okay, so something like what types of stress management? What two
like really specific or no?
I'm just typing it out as you talk it.
Okay, like breathing type.
For
Or people with autism. You have, or people with autism who have anxiety. That would be.
what do you think of that question? I was just typing as you were talking, trying to process what you were saying into a question. So this is how it goes. You got to get something down and then think about it. Is this what I really am interested in looking at? If not, where do we make tweaks?
How about, is there a difference between physical activity and breathing techniques decrease stress for people with autism? Is that what she's looking at?
Can you talk a little bit louder? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Is there a difference between physical activity and breathing techniques to decrease stress for people with autism? Is that what she's looking at?
So generally, and this is something that you will learn in your stats class, generally when we write research questions, we kind of try to keep them in more of the non-directional, increasing or decreasing. Just from a statistical standpoint, it's a little bit harder to say to test for increases or decreases as opposed to no changes. But, you know, that's just a small, you know, whatever. So you
wouldn't usually put decrease. Okay. Well,
not unless you are absolutely sure that what you're going to do is decrease.
And if I wasn't doing an experiment, right? Or like if I was doing like a trial. Like if I was just trying, okay. I have to think about that.
You can talk about directionality, so increasing or decreasing. But unless you were absolutely sure that what you were going to do was going to increase or decrease, it would just be easier. And this is the standard way to kind of do it, is to write it with no direction. So is there a difference is there a difference in stress management between physical activity and breathing techniques for people with autism? So here you're just kind of exploring. Is there a difference between these two techniques? And so you're not saying that, I mean, we're hoping that it decreases stress, right? We don't want to increase stress. But what if through the process of doing this, we find that one increases and one decreases stress?
You can still put it in the conclusion.
Yeah, you can talk about that all throughout your findings and conclusion. But from the get-go, you probably kind of want to leave it broadly non-directional type of a thing. Okay, anybody else want to try? Kate. I'm going to type it out here.
Yeah, but I used the directionality, so I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
I used both of them.
Can increasing a patient's self-esteem decrease the chance of relapse after discharge? Okay. So then if I read this question, I am assuming that there's going to be some self-esteem intervention and that there's going to be some measurement, multiple time points of measurement of self-esteem. Actually, I think you would measure self-esteem and you would also measure relapse.
Right.
So relapse wouldn't have multiple measuring points. It would only have one at your post-discharge measurement. So maybe 3-month or 6-month follow-up. But you would also have to measure self-esteem to see if you did in fact increase it. Because let's say you didn't increase it and you see all this relapse.
Right.
Or let's say you don't measure it and you see all this relapse. You can't really explain why you see all this relapse, because there could be a billion things, right, that impact somebody's chances of relapse. Maybe it's a self-esteem issue, but if you didn't measure it, you won't be able to talk about that. So I think you would measure self-esteem at multiple points and relapse just at one. See how already
Stats is coming.
It all does come. It's all present all the time. But just even in the process of talking about an idea, we can already see the things that we're going to have to do to make a project like this come forward, right?
Well, right. And I mean, one of the other things goes back to I think our conversation last week, where I'm thinking, okay, to do this, would I have to withhold those interventions from a group of people also?
Not with the way that this is written.
Okay.
Because there's nothing in here that is talking about comparing people who get it or don't get it. You just want to know, if I increase it, will they relapse? Right. But you don't necessarily have to withhold an intervention to see if you relapse. So in writing questions like these two questions, I can see already, Molly, in your question, that when we start to look for evidence, right, following the steps of evidence-based practice, so step 2, search databases, we're going to be searching for stress management. We're going to be searching for physical activity and breathing techniques broadly, but then maybe specific to autism as well. We're going to search stress management broadly, and then also specific to autism. So it's helpful to write out your question, because it makes it really clear what constructs you're measuring, you're trying to understand. That's what you need to look, what literature you need to look for. So Kate, we need to look for self-esteem, we need to look for relapse, and probably there needs to be a little bit more detail in who your patient population is, so that you can narrow that in really. Because I mean, if you just search self-esteem literature, you're going to have so much.
Yeah,
so
that's what I came up with when I was doing the form. It was like thousands.
Yeah. So what patient population are you talking about?
So I'm talking about like short stay rehab patients. So right now we're developing a brand new program, and I think I brought this up before, where it's people that are coming in for short stay rehab.
Like broken rehab?
Well, so often it's because a lot of them are IV drug users, and so they're on extensive antibiotic treatments, different things like that. Maybe they have deconditioned or had, incidences of when they've been under the influence that have landed them in the hospital, and that they are not able to discharge to the community or to inpatient treatment center. So they're coming into the long-term care system, and they're either on pain meds or, there's a lot of mixed things going on with it, that we're trying to figure out a program that kind of being in that in-between program, so that they don't relapse where they're with us, or that they have some support before they can get into treatment. So it's a completely undeveloped model within the long-term care system, but we're getting so many people now with substance abuse disorders. We've got to come up with something.
So then you might not, in the process, so I changed this to, can increasing self-esteem for short stay rehab patients decrease the chance of relapse after discharge? Already that's more refined and tells you, it refines your search. So you may not find anything, like you say, this is kind of an undeveloped area. So you might not find anything specific to short stay rehab in terms of self-esteem or anything else. But you could broaden it out, your search, to long stay rehab, or whatever the alternative to short stay is, traditional length. I don't know. The terminology better, but you could then say, here's all this literature about the standard length of time for rehab and the impacts on relapse, but there's nothing on short stay rehab, and therefore we need to do this. So you can still use literature, even if it's not specific to your area, to support your area. by saying, look, there's nothing in our area, but there's all this other stuff that is related to what I'm talking about. And so I'm going to use it as my evidence until we have our own evidence. And that is totally okay to do. Okay, so Holly, you've got one over here. We'll make this the last one. The efficacy of using individualized music on agitated behaviors. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Of older adults with dementia. All right. How can we put this into a question?
What are the effects of using individualized music? That way you're not really, I mean, there could be no effect, but you're not really saying it's going to decrease or increase agitation.
So you're going to be searching the literature about music therapy.
Like individualized or preferred music and music therapy, and in relation to
music and memory stuff, right?
Yeah, we talked about that. There was a little side chat last week about it. Somebody gave me some information that I'm gonna research more about, which was awesome. So yeah,
the thing is that there are a lot of programs like that exist, and that there's a lot of popular media, mainstream media, that have done little bits and pieces on it, and so it feels like there's so much information, but there might not actually be published scholarly literature about it.
And that's where because I originally was going to try to branch out farther and see what the effects were on cognition, but for the realm of the master's program, I just didn't feel like I had enough time or resources to do that. So I know there's been more research in agitation and agitated behaviors in regard to using music programs. So that's where I'm going. And you see a lot with quality of life, simply with like drawing into that long-term memory and how that can improve quality of life for people. But the research is kind of sporadic. So it's kind of taking bits and pieces right now and meal piecing, I guess, it together just to to help validate.
Right, support.
Yes, support. Show support for it. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, one more. Abby, do you have something?
Yeah.
I called you out.
What are the effects of yoga on the mood of individuals with depression? Kind of stole what are the effects, but
It's okay. I literally have something similar down here like that. Yeah.
What are the effects of yoga on mood? So mood is very broad,
yes,
right?
I can't pick like a certain, like I wanted to, could I say what are the effects of yoga on the symptoms of, what are the effects of yoga on individuals? What are the effects of yoga on the symptoms of depression? Like,
oh yeah, we talked about this. Like, what are the symptoms of depression?
What if you did the anhedonia?
Anhedonia, yeah, but I also am interested in like the persistent feelings of sadness and like anxiousness and worry. That I just don't know how to combine all that.
So broadly, you're calling all of that mood.
Yeah.
But you could get really bogged down in being too specific and hyper focused on something like anhedonia, right? Because there's probably nothing about there on yoga and anhedonia, right? But there's probably lots about anhedonia broadly. But where are you going to find the connection to yoga? There might not be anything. So yeah, this is the fine line of trying to be not too specific, but not too broad. You got to start somewhere. So maybe it's just starting with mood, and it's like after a couple of rounds of searching, you realize you have to narrow it down to either one specific or so.
You could narrow it down to one specific mood like depression or anxiety or something like that to narrow down the mood that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Or the affect or effect.
Or maybe you could do depression with anxiety.
Anxiety is another disorder.
Yeah, so we're having a difference in distinction between moods and diagnoses. Because depression is not really a mood, it's a diagnosis. Anxiety is not a mood, it's a diagnosis.
It's an emotion.
Yeah.
Instead of like.
So, you want specifically emotions, not a diagnosis.
Say that again.
Yeah.
You want specifically a mood, not a diagnosis.
No, I'm talking about depression as the diagnosis, but then wanting to measure a symptom of depression, which is like unstable mood and like sadness and lack of interest in things, stuff like that.
So you're really interested in a depression population,
Yeah.
but you don't want to get bogged down in trying to choose one symptom of depression because there are many.
Yeah.
So you're trying to broadly group the depression symptoms as mood.
Yeah. But there's other things too.
Yeah.
The symptoms like lack of sleep and things
So
like
one
that.
thing as you're searching in the literature that
Yeah.
you might want to see, how do people talk about mood? How do they conceptualize mood? Is it something smaller underneath a diagnosis like depression, or is it more the overarching umbrella mood is, and then under that you have other things like depression or anxiety or whatever?
Well, when I was researching, a lot of the times it would say that depression is a mood disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah. So I feel like that's why I chose mood, because it was just really broad.
This is a really good example of why we just have to keep on reading, right? So one article might call it a mood disorder, although I think a lot of them actually that is a way to conceptualize it, is an emotional disturbance, mood disorder. I think I've heard it more as mood.
With the DSM-5.
Yeah, so maybe you'll probably review some DSM-5-ness to see how it's categorized there as part of the diagnosis. And then that could help weed out a whole bunch of old stuff maybe that calls it something else.
Yeah.
But this is all the process of gathering the knowledge about something.
Yeah.
And then we refine as we go. And imagine if you could collect all of the knowledge about yoga and depression. Then you could come together and say, this is what depression is, and this is how yoga impacts it.
So there is a scale, the PQ9. I can get it for you and show it to you, but it's one that's been kind of mandated by the federal CMS, and we have to do that assessment on every individual that comes into long-term care, and we have to do it on a quarterly basis. And I don't do it; the social services person does it, but that could be a good place to look at what they look at as, because it's the mood. It's a mood survey. So they're looking at all the different elements of mood.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the PHQ, the patient health question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Marika uses it all the time in her yoga work. So that's another thing. As you're reading the literature, what instruments are being used to measure these constructs? Is everybody using the PHQ-9 to measure depression? Or are they all using Beck's depression inventory? Or are they all using some random, Cosmos version of the depression, self-measuring depression, take our quiz type of a thing, right? Hopefully not. And if they do, no. Somebody was saying something online, sorry.
I said, boy, I hope they're using the PHQ-9.
Well, but there are a lot of,
made that almost standard.
There's a lot of instruments out there that all measure the same thing, say different sides of the same coin type of thing. So you have to choose, and you justify why you choose what you choose. Okay, so this has been a fantastic discussion, guys. We got a little heated for a little while in the middle, but I think that's okay because that keeps us fired up and, ready to have our future discussions from week to week. Great job, again, on the discussion threads. Keep commenting the way you've been doing it. It's really good. Next week, we are going to call class tentative based on what Hurricane Irma decides to do. It's looking like the last little thing coming up this side is that it's going to turn and go skirt up right along the east coast of Florida, but then it makes a direct beeline into South Carolina.
There's a good chance I'm not going to have power next week.
Now we got the hurricane.
Yeah.
It's exciting to live here.
And that's like a Monday, Tuesday, South Carolina landfall. So you know what? Let's just say that next week is tentative. Friday, Saturday-ish. We'll check in and see how everybody is feeling about what Wednesday looks like. And we'll just leave it at that.
Right on.
Good team. Everybody have a good night.
Hope
Thank
you
you
all
for
take
shooting.
care.
you.
Good luck.
Yeah.